Hey guys. You are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku had a support quirk. Here is short summary. Izuku Midoriya, born with the quirk of hype, can buff anyone who trusts him, but he himself isn't very strong, but he still has hopes of becoming the #1 hero. Can he do it? Or will he fail? Against other hopefuls like Katsuki Bakugo, Shoto Todoroki, Setsuna Tokage, and way more people than he could remember the names of. Does he even stand a chance? Izuku in Class 1B. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Our hero was tied to a chair. He grimaced as the massively muscular plot bunny swung the light. "You used to be so punctual, old friend," it noted, leaning down. "So why is it now you can't write the stories the fans want to see?" it asked. Toga, the hero said, grasping for ideas. "Yes, hero, what does Toga do?" She love, he twitches, has to find who kissed Izu, fights Momo." Plot bunny patted him on the cheek. "It's all right, hero, nobody can blame you. Well, not harder than you blame yourself at least." It held up something the hero could not stand. "Here you go, pal," it said, forcing him to chew the taffy. I'm Trin," he pleaded as the taffy got stuck on his teeth and he tried desperately to chew it. Plot bunny chuckled. "By the way, I have a new idea for a story for you." It placed a piece of paper down his shirt. "Remember to update it as often as you do everything else." It snickered as it pressed play on the TV remote and chose something new for him to watch. A man walked on the screen, and instantly our hero knew what he was. A preacher man trying to be hip with the youth. "Heya, my friendos." Hero shook his head. He groaned. "Boony peas," he begged. "Have you ever heard of a sweet broem called JC? The preacher man asked. "He's a fun guy to have around. Is his rule and UN who and Tor Ewer," and the hero's screams filled the night. Feel the hype. The girls of 1A had sneakily gathered in the girls' bathroom to discuss a secret plot, but they all were running dry on ideas. "Maybe if we put a muzzle on him he'll get the message," Jiro suggested. It was one of her least violent ideas of dealing with their problem. "No share," Yuga said, shaking his head. "He's a pervert, and that could backfire if he's into it." "I keep forgetting you're here," Jiro said as the lone boy in the girls' bathroom went back to doing his nails. Silently she lamented they were better kept than her own. Mina rubbed her chin. She had her tongue out in concentration. "Maybe we could." "Aizawa won't let us physically hurt him," Ochako said. "Well, not too much, and not if we ambush him, Mina." They all shivered as they imagined their homeroom teacher turning his quick canceling gaze at them. Suddenly the door opened. The 1A girls, and Yuga for some reason, wondered if their problem had found them. Whoa. But their collective fears were erased as Itsuka Kendo stared at them. "Pretty weird to hang out in the girls' bathroom, guys," she said. "And, guy, huh?" Yuga waved at her and she dumbly waved back. She shook her head. "No what? Just," she stepped around the group. "Don't mind me," and entered the last stall. "Should I leave, madam?" he asked, as sparkly as ever. "I mean, it is the girls' bathroom," she said, a bit uncomfortable that a guy might hear her doing her business. "He can't," Toru cried. "He has a big mouth, and if he leaves, Mineta might know we're trying to get rid of him." "Mineta?" Itsuka asked. "Oh, the perv from your class." She vaguely remembered a time he tried to squeeze her bodies. She sighed. "Fine." And then she got out of the stall, washed her hands and sat by the others. "What have we got so far?" "I didn't hear you flush," Mina stated. "I haven't gone yet. The faster you all leave, the faster I can." She left the sentence there. "So far we only have one solid plan," Momo lamented. "Toru." The invisible girl nodded, which Itsuka only knew caused the note she was holding bobbed. "Right. This was suggested by Suyu. What if we got a boy to discourage Mineta's perverseness?" Reasons why we stopped was simple. "The only effective deterrents we have are Bakugo, Todoroki, and Kirishima," Jiro stated. "Kirishima's too easy to distract and ditch. Shoto's clueless and easy to trick, and Bakugo's more likely to kill us for even thinking of asking him. The others are either not threatening enough or pervs too," Jiro groaned. Itsuka nodded. She knew what 1A was going through. Well, sorta. Personally, she also thought they were kinda lucky not having a class perv that was female, though she knew at least Setsuna only groped people consensually, What if we ask a boy? She asked. Her schoolmates looked at her. That could work, Momo smiled. Will it? Jiro said carefully, like nothing personal, but I don't think your metal guy is going to be harder to ditch than Kirishima. I wasn't thinking about asking Tetsu though. No, Itsuka had something worse in mind. Have two of you meet me in the library in 13 minuets. I'll bring the firepower, she said. And that's how Momo and Jiro sat waiting for Itsuka and the mystery guy she planned on bringing. Soon they saw the orange-haired girl dragging a skinny green-haired boy with her. Well, she really brought the muscle, didn't she? Jiro snarked, seeing the boy was much thinner than she was, and then for a brief second wondered if he was okay. Sorry we're late, Itsuka said, but we're here now. Itsuka held her mouth over the boy's indoor voice, she stressed. He nodded quickly, and after she let go of his mouth he bowed low. Sorry senpais, I was trying to help Abara-senpai braid her hair. He apologized sincerely and energetically. I may have gotten a little tangled up, he chuckled. Then his eyes went wide and he face-palmed himself. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I'm a first year. The 1A girls blinked. Jiro said. But Momo simply smiled, returned his bow, and said, Hello Izuku. I'm Momo Yaoyorozu. And this is Kyoka Jiro. She gestured to her friend who simply raised her hand, and we're first years too, so we aren't your senpais. Izuku nodded so quickly Jiro half wondered if his head would fall off. Okay, so we're in the same year, Momo-senpai. Right, I'll try to remember that so I don't bug you or Kyoko-senpai. Sorry if I forget though, senpais. Momo's smile faltered slightly. As I said Izuku, we're not your senpais, she reminded him politely. Oh, thanks for the reminder Momo-senpai. Izuku bowed again. Sorry Momo-senpai. Kyoka-senpai. He bowed again twice as he said their names. Does he call everyone senpai? Jiro asked. Itsuka shook her head, just certain people. So cause Momo looks older he'll just keep calling her senpai? Jiro asked. Momo-senpai does look more mature than most people our age, Izuku nodded. Don't you think Kyoka-senpai? Were she alone Jiro would have nodded, because Momo looked like she was 18. Upon meeting her first Jiro assumed she and Ida were upperclassmen who'd come to welcome them to UA and warn them about wreaking the school's image or something, but since there were other people she just asked, then why call me senpai? She assumed he'd say something like cause you're with Momo-senpai. Cause you have this look in your eyes Kyoka-senpai, it's… Izuku stuck out his tongue in concentration. It's not mature, he said. He shut his eyes and began tapping his head with both hands in an upbeat rhythm. What's the word? He asked himself. His eyes shot open and seemed to light up. Oh, analytical. He nodded. Your eyes are so analytical. I can't believe you're both freshmen like me senpai. Okay, so he was an alright person, but why out of everyone in class 1B did Itsuka bring him? Jiro wondered. He grinned as her eyes scanned him. It felt like she'd proven him right. Maybe he saw the future? Well Izuku, do you know why you're here? Momo asked. Izuku nodded again. Yep senpai, Itsuka-senpai said you needed help. The girls waited for him to say, with dealing with a pervert, but Izuku just energetically bounced in place with a grin on his face. And he is the one you said could help, right? Jiro asked. Maybe Izuku was just part of a study session Itsuka had planned and the real help was yet to arrive. Itsuka nodded. So what's his quirk then? Hype, Izuku grinned. My quirk hype gives me the ability to buff anyone's abilities, or mental state. Anything really if they believe in me. I use these cool high-tech flying taiko drums with to amplify my quirk. After I got to UA, before that I used regular taiko drums which also amplify my quirk. Drums, huh? Jiro asked. I see, but and pardon my questioning Itsuka, but is Izuku the right man for the job here? Dealing with perverts was tricky business after all. Izuku's passionate, he won't quit something till he's done, Itsuka said, and best of all. Well Izuku, who's your roommate? Abara-senpai, Izuku smiled. She's so nice to me, she always reminds me to go to sleep, and sometimes she lets me drum in the room if I'm not too loud. The girl's eyes widened. What? Jiro asked. Funny story, Izuku said. You see, originally Komori was roomed with Abara-senpai, but there was complications cause Abara-senpai's religious and Komori's gay. Not that Abara had a problem with Komori's duality. Itsuka stressed, knowing Izuku often omitted that part since he knew Abara as one of the sweetest people in the world and knew her feelings on the matter, and simply assumed everyone already knew that. No, Komori decided to move out cause she couldn't help. Izuku rubbed his chin. How did Komori say it again? Oh, she was worried her eyes would start to wander and make Ibara-senpai uncomfortable, and there were her own problems with religion, but I don't know much about that. But you're sharing a room with a girl? Momo asked again. For certain reasons, the only two people who could change rooms with Komori were Izuku and Setsuna. Ibara was sure she'd die of a heart attack if Setsuna moved in with her. There was a bunch of reason why, Izuku said. I think most other people couldn't stand the smell of mushrooms. But why not just have solo rooms? Momo asked politely. Izuku and Itsuka gave each other an awkward look. It's personal, they both said quickly. Then Itsuka said, it's not about Izuku, it's Ibara. If you really want to know, it's her story to tell, not ours. That told Jiro that they didn't want to say something about Ibara that might embarrass her. After a few seconds, Itsuka said, well, let's get to the reason why we're here. She took a breath and turned to Izuku. Izuku, they have this friend. Not really our friend, Jiro stressed. I mean, perhaps if he could control himself better, Momo said. But he's a pervert, which is one thing. But he's also a groper, Jiro said. She didn't care for perverts as long as they kept their thoughts to themselves and didn't try anything to who they were perving after. But Mineta constantly mouthed off about what he was thinking, and he'd already tried to grope Ochako, so they needed to nip this in the bud. I see, Izuku nodded. Self-control issues, Momo nodded. His name is Minoru Mineta, and we would be extremely grateful if you could ward him of. She looked around. Where did he go? Jiro asked. After Momo said Mineta's name, Izuku seemed to vanish. To take care of your pervert, Itsuka said, positively. Octopus time skip octopus. Mineta sat in his room alone as usual. He was trying to figure out which dirty mag had the best cover model, which is why his floor was covered in them. Number 22 is. He said as he studied the big body ED model. Very attractive, he said with a perverse smile. But just how attractive is she compared to the... Mineta stopped. He could swear he heard some banging in the distance. He shook his head. Others? He finished looking at the pile of what was supposed to be the top 10. The banging got louder, though now Mineta knew it was drums. He rolled his eyes. Bakugo probably, he said, knowing the almost psychotic boy would probably send an explosion his way if he even tried to tell him to quiet down. But then as Mineta was about to compare 22 with the other 14, he realized something. The sound wasn't drums, they were from a taiko drum, big, heavy, and not the kind Bakugo could play, which raised the question who could play the taiko drum. No, he said, not drums. He realized, it was almost like someone was running while carrying and beating 5 different taiko drums. Suddenly the sound was outside his door, Bimo, and something hit his door and bounced off, owie. Mineta stepped back as the drums started again, and his door was opened and pushed by some skinny shirtless green-haired guy in a festival happy and a twisted headband, walked in banging floating tech taiko drums. You're Mineta? He asked. Who wants to know? Mineta said, trying to sound tough. The green-haired boy took a deep breath. I believe you can beat this addiction, Mineta, he shouted. Huh? The boy picked up a dirty mag. Look, you've even collected so many dirty mags to feed your addiction. It's not an addiction, Mineta said. Then he smirked. Look buddy, it's just a few mags you can have on. Then let's burn them, Izuku said seriously. Mineta screeched, trying to pull his babies to him. He needed them, they were the source of his power. Without them he couldn't be horny anymore. Wait, no, that's dumb, Mineta said, calming himself down. The reason I want them is cause I have a high drive. If you take them away I'll just become worse. Oh, I don't actually care about the magazines, the boy dropping the one he was holding. In fact, most of the people I know have some. Mineta was now confused. What? He shook his head. Look, I don't know what you want or who you are, but please leave. I'm Izuku, the green-haired teen said, taking the large drumsticks off his belt, and I'm here. He slowly started beating a floating drum, to believe in you. For the next 7 days, wherever Mineta went he heard drums and enthusiastic shouting, followed by Izuku running over to him. No matter what he did or where he did it, Izuku found him and forced his encouragement onto him. The girls of Class 1A were in shock and amazement as their biggest problem vanished as he was trying to avoid Izuku. Finally, now we can prepare for the big test, Toru said, breathing a sigh of relief. Yes, I can't wait. Now we can study without him finding us and making us uncomfortable, Momo said. About that, Suyu croaked. Aizawa said he moved that up from the end of the month to tomorrow cause he thought we weren't studying hard enough. Mina groaned. Why Mr. Aizawa? Mr. Aizawa walked into the room. Maybe you should all try studying instead of complaining, he said walking past them. Izuku Midoriya, the hopeful future #1 hero. Izuku and his classmates stood shoulder to shoulder decked out in their hero costumes complete with all the accessories as they and their teacher Sekijiro-kan, Vlad King, waited in anticipation of All Might's first lesson. And his arrival, it hadn't gotten to the point where Vlad King would just say he wasn't coming and do the lesson himself, but he had stopped telling the students to wait, which meant that all that could be heard were faint murmurs from the few people who were talking to someone next to them that they felt close to. Izuku was pretty lucky though. Why? Because he was in between two of his good friends, Abara-senpai, and Naoko. I wonder if anything has happened to All Might? Abara said to herself. He probably got caught up dealing with some villain scum, she said with her trademark smirk. It takes a little time to scrape shit off your shoes after all, she chuckled. I'll bet that they gave up immediately upon seeing him, Izuku said tapping his drumsticks to a rhythm only he could hear. When I'm the #1 hero I bet people will throw fights with me all the time. Abara smiled. I doubt they would want to feel the wrath of Hype man, Izuku said. Abara nodded. Yes, they'll surely cower in fear of the Hype man's rhythmic wrath. Actually it's just Hype man senpai, Izuku said. The Hype man, huh? Naoko asked. Not what makes sense, you'd already have the perfect name ready, Naoko said ignoring Izuku. Do you have a catchphrase ready too, Izuku-san? Abara asked. Several test phrases really? Naoko asked. Well, they aren't Finn, Izuku started but Naoko said. Nope, you have to say them, Abara nodded, it's the rules. Izuku looked between both of his friends, his cheeks reddened slightly. Oh okay, he said. They're a little embarrassing though. We will get the class on a chant if we have to, Abara stated. Izuku took a deep breath. This first one is just me shouting I am the hype. Nice reference, Naoko said, and it does fit you, Abara said. Both she and Naoko looked at each other, then Naoko said, 6 out of 10. Izuku looked at Abara who nodded in agreement with Naoko's score, thus with a sigh he continued with, next was this hype train don't stop. Naoko shook her head. So, it's not very lively, Abara said. 4 out of 10. Fair enough, the last is, I am here, to believe in you. Perfect, Naoko said snapping her fingers, go with that one. I agree it suits you perfectly, Abara said. What about you two? Izuku asked. All right class. Vlad King said. Looks like All Might ain't gonna make it. He waited for the class to groan before he said. Yes, I'm not too pleased either, but you're all heroes in training so we've more important things to do. Now let's mix you all up. Kan-sensei had the students all split up and chose people who weren't used to working with each other. Izuku was teamed with Yui Kodai. Naoko was teamed with Nirengeki Shota, and Abara was partnered with Setsuna Tokage. All right, now, Kan-sensei said tossing numbered flags to certain teams and whispering something to others. Here, he said tossing a flag to Izuku and Yui. I got it, Izuku said trying to grab it. He fumbled with it nearly dropping it, but Yui grabbed the pole of the flag. Here, she said handing it to him. Thanks Kodai-senpai, Izuku said. He looked at the flag. What's with this number? Izuku asked seeing the number 7 on their flag. He looked at Kodai but she just shrugged. Now you all have a flag and a number, Kan-sensei said. The goal of this exercise is simple. Those with flags must guard their flags. Those without have a number displayed on the flag itself showing which they must chase and capture, he stated. Hiding the flag is not allowed, it must be displayed prominently. Izuku tucked the flag into his headband. If your flag is taken then you and the team that took it switch roles, Vlad King said. You will all be scored based on your performance during this exercise. He waited a moment and then shouted, Flag team 15 seconds head start. Izuku ran into the fake city believing there would be more places to hide. Yui passed him and took his hand pulling him into a nearby building. Phew, Izuku called. Good call Kodai-senpai, they'll never look for us in here. The ones not chasing us won't, she said pocketing some stones she found. How do you figure that? Izuku asked. We're in the first building on the left, Exactly where I said we'd be, Kodai stated. Oh, that makes sense, Izuku said. Wait, what? Kodai turned to him. If everyone is looking for a flag, they'd have memorized the one they need and who was carrying it, something that was made much easier with us all wearing our costumes for this, she stated, pulling him upstairs. But other teams could cause us problems if we fight in the open, thus I isolated us and our enemies into a 2-on-2. She stopped noticing a pipe on the wall and started trying to kick it off. Sturdy, she noted. Here, Izuku said, readying his drumsticks, put your trust in me, senpai. She raised a brow as a taiko drum floated in front of him. He focused on just his senpai and hit the drum. Green lighting spread over Yui's body. Whoa, she blurted out. She felt amazing. No, she felt incredible. She looked at the pipe and with just one hand she easily pulled it off the wall. Amazing, she said breathlessly. She pressed her fingers together and the pipe shrunk and she slipped it down her sleeve. Then she ran down the hall and hit the wall. She stared back at the now cracked concrete, but despite her head being what cracked it, she herself felt no pain. She turned back to see Izuku running after her, still halfway down the hall. She watched as the green lightning faded from her and she went back to feeling normal. Your Quirk? She asked. Hype, Izuku grinned. Anyone who I can name and who trusts me, I can buff them. She looked at her fingers. She barely trusted him though, and she felt so powerful. Was that enough for his full effect? Or was what she felt nothing compared to what his parents would feel? She shook her head. Those were questions for later. I guess your Quirk shrinks things? He asked as she started walking upstairs. Alters the size of inanimate objects, she stated. So cool, he gushed. Izuku froze as he heard something familiar. He turned and his fears were confirmed. Senpai, he whispered, I know who's chasing us. Yui turned back and froze. Vines were creeping in through the empty windows and had pooled onto the floor. Suggestions? She asked quietly. This is her Jophiel's watch move. If we touch them, or are too loud, she'll feel the vibrations and that'll let her know where we are. And Setsuna will come after. Yui turned ready to ascend the stairs, but Izuku held her in place. She's already spread her vines past this floor, Izuku said. Our best bet is to go backwards and slip out of a window to catch them by surprise. No, we go higher. That will force Abara to take the stairs while Setsuna chases us herself, Yui said, pressing her back to the wall and trying to sneak upstairs. Izuku followed her example. I don't think Abara will try chasing us if we go past the 3rd floor. She's a stationary fighter and these halls are too crowded. Then we'll stop on the 3rd floor, Yui said as she reached the top. As Izuku had predicted, the 2nd floor was overrun with vines, but Yui gracefully stepped around the vines. Izuku followed after her carefully. The vines kept moving though, some quick, some slow. It made not disturbing them a massive challenge, but somehow both Izuku and Yui made it across. That was hard, Izuku said. Yui nodded before she intentionally stomped on a vine. The rest all reared up and reached for her, but she grabbed Izuku's hand and ran up the stairs. Why did you do that, senpai? Izuku asked. Yui stayed calm though as she explained. Cause now she thinks she stopped us from getting any higher. They reached the 3rd floor, vines blocked the way upstairs. Thus they ducked into a large room. Now we wait, Kodai said, letting go of Izuku's arm. Hope she doesn't take too long, that's what she said. Yui rolled her eyes as Izuku took her hand. Not funny, Izuku. Izuku felt Yui grab his hand again. Me? He asked. I didn't say it. Both of them froze and looked at their hands. 2 separate hands held theirs. It's pretty cold in here. They both turned to see Setsuna faking a shiver. Maybe we should all cuddle for warmth? She winked. Yui shook Setsuna's hand off her own and leapt back. Izuku tried pulling it off, but he wasn't able to actually get it off. This feels weird, he cried. First time? Setsuna asked with a chuckle. Don't worry, the way I do it will make you feel like a king, she smirked. Enough of the jokes, Yui said. You're just trying to distract us. Maybe I'm trying to get laid. You two certainly are my type. Yui felt confused until she noticed Izuku. His cheeks were red and he had stopped focusing on the hand, the one that had let go of his arm and now started stroking his hair. With a grin, Setsuna blew him a kiss and Izuku's entire face turned red and he dropped to his knees as steam rose from his head. Izuku, Yui called, is something wrong? From what I understand, he's pretty sheltered, Setsuna said. Just a little affection from a girl turns him into this. Abara raised herself into the room using her hair. It's done. She looked at Izuku and nodded. Yes, he's out. Though she said that Abara's hair quickly took his drumsticks, and in case he comes to now we have his main defense, she said, wrapping her hair around them. Hear that, Yui? Setsuna asked as her hand grabbed the flag. Soon wheel, a stone knocked the flag out of Setsuna's hand. Not yet, Yui said, pressing her fingers together. The stone grew into a massive boulder that hit the floor and started cracking it. Yui jumped as the boulder shook the floor, making Setsuna fall over. Then Yui ran to grab the flag, only to have to dodge Abara's vines that had tried to do the same. It's almost over, Yui, Abara stated. We just need to grab that flag and run. Abara sent all of her hair towards Yui, who slid the pipe out of her sleeve, and with a quick finger press she swatted them back with a full-sized pipe. But the vines were unrelenting and came back twice as fast. Yui felt overwhelmed until a large drum blocked the vines. It ain't over till the fat lady sings, Izuku said, having come back to his senses. Oh, but it is, Setsuna said as she and Abara readied themselves. After all, we have your drumsticks. Your quirk isn't very effective without your drums, Izuku, Abara stated. You told me that yourself, she said as her hair spread around the room. Setsuna stretched her body sensually. Yeah, handsome, so sorry, but when you lose I'll be sure to give you a nice warm cuddle. Then her entire body split apart. And you're going to lose, she said. Izuku walked over to Yui, his arm behind his back. Or perhaps not, Izuku said, pulling his arm from behind him. Clasped in his hand was a brass bugle, and quickly he played a tune with it. Green lightning again spread over Yui's body and her incredible feeling returned. She placed the flag back into Izuku's headband and readied herself with the pipe. Did you know he had that? Setsuna asked. I didn't even know he could play one, Abara said. Ready, Izuku? Yui asked Izuku. He just nodded as he continued playing. Then let's go, Yui stated as she threw tons of stones at their opponents. Vlad King watched as his students all tried their very hardest to keep their flags and to steal the flags of others. He'd pretty much made the exercise up off the top of his head, and used what All Might had ready for his lesson since he still hadn't shown up. He should have taken more time to think up rules. He'd already found several teams who'd actually won the exercise already, like Monoma and Shota, who'd been stuck dodging Tetsu and Shihai Kuwaro, and by dodging he meant completely avoiding by using their quirks to jump from building to building. Thus he called the match in their favor since the Chaser team couldn't do anything to them. Then was Itsuka Kendo and Jirota Shishida. Both had brains and brawn, and completely blocked off any way to escape them. Komori and Yanagi pretty much just gave them the flag after Itsuka managed to pin Reiko down. And that was the matches really. He'd tried to pick teams that would have trouble working together, but he obviously hadn't thought about it as hard as he should have. Monoma's ego made her take control of her team, and Shota agreed because he enjoyed cooperating. Khan expected Kendo and Shishida to argue a little about who would lead, but they just started cooperating instantly. Then was Group 7, Izuku the loudmouth and Yui the nearly silent. He hadn't expected them to get on too well, and the ones chasing them were Setsuna and Abara the pervert and the prude. He'd assumed that Setsuna would have said something Abara would have taken issue with. You want to lead? I love a girl who likes to be on top. Or, I'd love you to be all over me like ivy on a wall. Something crass and rude, but the two seemed to be holding their ground, but so did the other team, which made him wonder, had they all completed the test, since the point of it was to cooperate even when it's difficult, or should he wait? And if he should wait, what should he wait for? He'd forgotten to assign a time limit. He sighed. The whole lesson had been a failure. He pressed a button. All right everyone, I'm calling it now, he said. The lesson's over, the rest of it is free time, he groaned. The students seemed to share his sentiments. But he was proud to know that nobody had abandoned their teammate, which was the only way to fail. He'd grade them later. Right now he had a MIA teacher to find. Class 1B had split. Some had taken the lesson as a failure since they noted some flaws in their costumes. They headed over to research course. Others still wanted to get a workout and headed to UA's gym, and the last few just wanted to relax and took the time to go back to their dorms. Izuku was none of these. He was too energetic to relax. His costume was fine and he worked out earlier. No, he wanted to explore UA, so that's what he was doing. Which had him wandering around the building. He was admiring a crack in the wall, as it was clearly a fist print. Who had done it? He wondered to himself, were they still at UA? Or had they gone on to craft their heroic legend? And most importantly of all, why hasn't it been fixed yet? Then his brain thought of an answer and his jaw dropped in shock. No, he thought, this mark, it must be All Might's. He declared mentally, that's why nobody fixed it. UA itself took a shot from the symbol of peace and is still standing, and then he wondered, if this is All Might's fist mark, maybe that's where he was. After all, if he had a fist imprint in a wall in the most prestigious hero school, he'd get all nostalgic after seeing it all these years later. Thus Izuku felt the call to place his fist inside the fist imprint, as a way of passing the torch, that when he left UA to become a real hero and get closer to his goal of being the #1 hero, he'd have a fist imprint right next to All Might's own. He'd even sign it so that everyone knew it was his, and then someday a young teen standing exactly where Izuku now stood would see the fist prints and place their own fist in Izuku's, and then the torch would again be passed. And that's what Izuku did. He walked to the wall and placed his fist inside the imprint. He could feel the destiny being passed down to him. Whoa, he said. He felt great. Maybe he should go and join the others at the gym. He had to get stronger after all. Thus he turned round the corner and was knocked over. Ow! He groaned, lifting his head up. Across from him was a tired-looking girl with purple hair. Hi, he smiled, looking up to her. I'm Izuku, he said, stretching his hand to her. She just stared at him. Yeah, hi. Izuku stood up and started dusting himself off. Sorry for walking into you. I get kinda distracted, he chuckled. Her eyes seemed to light up for a second, and she looked around. And you're from class 1B, Izuku answered cheerfully. Then his eyes went wide and his mind was blank. And Izuku, what is your quirk? She smirked. Hype, anyone that trusts me and whose name I know, I can buff them. How useful, she noted. Any weaknesses? If I don't know someone's name, I can't buff them. Using music seems to help my quirk. I use floating taiko drums for the best result. Without any instruments I can whistle or sing, but it's not very effective. I can't sleep. I have to focus on who I want to buff and what I want to buff about them. I'm not very strong myself, so I have to rely on others to keep me safe in a fight, Izuku droned emotionlessly. The girl looked confused. You can't sleep? How is that a weakness? I've never slept a day in my life, and I wonder if that's the reason I'm so weak. Then Izuku's eyes widened. Oh, that's weird, he said, scratching his head. I don't know why I told you that. He put his hands together. Please don't tell anyone, senpai. I'll owe you big time, he pleaded. Hey, she frowned. Like you could even give me what I want. I mean, I can't if you don't tell me what that is, Izuku said. I haven't told you because it's impossible, she stated. So you say, but I don't know yet, senpai. Fine, she said with an eye roll. I want to be in the hero classes, but I have an evil quirk. Okay, what's your quirk? He asked. Is this guy dense? She sighed. I brainwash people. Then she covered her mouth. Why did I tell him that? How's that evil? Izuku asked. She turned around expecting his response. Yeah, I'd make a great. She turned back. What? Do you have to rip out people's hearts? Izuku asked. Ew, no. Do you vomit out this black tar-like stuff into people's mouths? No, she said, looking a bit sickly. Is it fueled by orphans' dreams? No, she said exasperatedly. I ask a question, and if someone answers it, they're forced to do what I say. But that's not really evil. It isn't. Izuku shook his head. Course not. When you think about it, super strength is way more evil than that. She shook her head. What? How? 'Cause you could crush someone with it, or take their stuff. But I take over people's minds, she said. Name one time that could be good. What if someone was on a roof and they're going to jump? I'd need them to believe in me, and I'd need their name so I could buff their positivity or need to not want to die, Izuku stated. But you could just ask their name, and when they answer, have them walk down on their own. How'd you? Izuku grinned. But you want me to help you get into the hero classes in exchange for our secret right? The purple-haired girl nodded dumbly. This guy was way too much for her to deal with. He was way too loud. Yeah, that was it. Not the fact that he'd idly defended her dream to be a hero without realizing. Well, the first thing is think fast, he shouted and punched her. ... At least from her perspective that's what he did, but she flinched and shut her eyes, yet she just felt something soft hit her cheek. She opened an eye and watched as he hit her other cheek, and again she just felt a soft thing which now she knew were his fists. "Was that you trying to hurt me?" she asked. "That's as hard as my fists are. My mum calls them my little marshmallows." Izuku smiled. He really is weak, she thought. "Anyway senpai, that was a test of your reaction speed," Izuku said, "and you passed in reverse." "Passed in reverse? What?" she asked. "I'm saying that someone might have considered your reaction a failure, but since I only believe you've truly failed once you stop trying, you passed in reverse." Izuku gave her a double thumbs up. "I hate trying," she groaned. "Then you won't get into the hero class," he sang. "What are we even supposed to do?" she asked. "We'll go to the gym," Izuku grinned. "Yeah, I'm not paying for any sort of membership. But the school has a gym that everyone has full access to." "What? You didn't know? But it was in a pamphlet, and they mentioned it at orientation." "I must have missed that," she said, not wanting to say she'd been so down since she'd actually made it to UA only to find out she was in the general studies course. "Well, let's start there." Izuku smiled, "and after that I'll ask Kon-sensei how students can switch to the hero course," and Izuku, so lost in his own excitement, grabbed the hand of the girl whose name he didn't know and dragged her to the gym. Unaware of the two people who'd watched the entire interaction. One of whom was Shota Aizawa, who'd seen the green-haired teen staring at a wall enthusiastically and on reflex stayed as still as he could to not attract attention. The other, Naoko Momona, had been following him since he left class, and judging by the look on her face and how quickly she turned and ran down the halls looking for a different gym route, she wasn't pleased about the encounter. Naoko liked Izuku, it wasn't a secret to anyone, and the only one oblivious enough was Izuku himself. That meant that usually Naoko spent her days following Izuku, without him knowing, and writing down what he did. It was totally normal and not creepy at all, and as usual Izuku had decided to help a stranger he didn't even know the name of. And it was a girl. Naoko, her teacher. Even most of her class knew why she had such a crush on her male green-haired classmate. And that reason was why she had to meet them there. After all, he was so heroic and charming when they met. He'd probably unintentionally have this girl seduced in no time. That was 6 years ago today, and after she found he had as many friends as she did, she decided that she was his best friend, and over time love bloomed. Though she quickly learned oblivious people weren't affected by Cupid's arrow, as Izuku was unaware of her obvious hints at the two doing couples things together. As he often continued helping people, some of which were girls, most of them, girls and boys, still sent him Valentine's Day cards. He just assumed that it was normal to have sent someone who helped you Valentine's Day cards. Naoko thought she'd finally gotten away from playing second fiddle to Izuku's fan base. In UA, where they were classmates, she finally had a chance to touch his heart and make him realize how much she meant to him. But this purple-haired girl got him to help her. Naoko was biting her nails as she ran through UA's campus. She needed to beat them there. She jumped out of the bushes. She was breathing heavily. Oh, she started seeing Izuku and the lazy girl before coughing. "How funny running into you here, Izuku." She gave him her cutest smile. The purple-haired girl gave her a concerned look. "Are you okay?" she asked. Naoko straightened her back. "Why, yeah, I'm." Then she coughed again. "You do look a little red," Izuku said. He pursed his lips and whistled. No lighting appeared on Naoko, but after a few seconds under his quirk she was breathing easier. "There you go," he smiled. "Thanks, Izuku." She smiled, likely even cuter than before. He gave her a big grin. "It's okay. Besides, you'll need it for training," Izuku grinned. "Yeah," Naoko agreed happily. "Training." Izuku used his card on the door and walked inside. "Yep, training." Naoko and the other girl used their cards and followed after him. And both watched as Izuku ripped off his school clothes and revealed he had his gym clothes underneath them, and almost immediately, "Ha, I called it." The group turned to see Setsuna holding a water bottle as she grinned. "I knew you'd come here eventually," she said, taking a sip of her water. "Wanna help me wrestle?" "No, I'm here to help." He gestured to the purple-haired girl. Hitomi," the purple-haired girl said. "Right, thanks," he said. "I'm here to help Hitomi-senpai train." "I'm a first year." "Me too, senpai." Izuku grinned. "So where do you want to start?" Walking?" Hitomi asked. This way, we'll get your gym clothes, Izuku said. Don't I have to bring them? No, they have tons of them, Izuku said. You can pick one up at the counter, and Naoko left to follow them. After the two girls had changed, Izuku dragged them both to the treadmills and ushered the two onto two unused ones that were next to each other. And both girls were jogging as Izuku cheered them on, and slowly Naoko reached over to Hitomi's machine, turned the speed and distance down. Why did you do that? Hitomi asked. Cause he always sets it at the hardest and longest setting, Naoko said. Hitomi gave Naoko a skeptical look, until Naoko's treadmill tilted upwards and she genuinely struggled not to fall off. Meanwhile Hitomi's stayed perfectly aligned. Hitomi watched as Naoko's treadmill rapidly changed speeds, heights, and started bucking like it was a bull, while Hitomi's just continued normally. After a minute Naoko was launched off and Izuku leapt to catch her. I got you, he called, and actually managed to catch her in midair, and he was caught in a giant hand. Izuku, haven't I told you to stop with that setting? Itsuka chided as she set him down. It's for third years and teachers only. Thanks Itsuka-senpai. Izuku grinned seeing her. Thanks Itsuka, Naoko said a little dazed. You two are lucky I saw you and knew to stay close, she groaned. Then she noticed Hitomi. Hey, sorry about Izuku, he tends to be a little too enthusiastic. It's fine I guess, Hitomi said, but silently remembered to thank Naoko for adjusting her treadmill. Unfortunately she forgot Izuku's enthusiasm led to him making stupid choices, like explaining to Itsuka what he was doing. Which taught Hitomi a very valuable lesson. Izuku might be the most enthusiastic person in 1B, but he wasn't the only enthusiastic person in 1B. And quickly Itsuka had Hitomi in boxing gloves against Izuku, who was armed with twin foam eskrima sticks that he twirled around. Okay, Itsuka said. Hitomi, all you have to do is hit Izuku, she said, kindly patting her on the back. Then she looked Izuku, and no trying to help her Izuku. Izuku just blushed and turned away so she couldn't see his face. What? Help her? Me? I'd never, he said, embarrassed that she'd figured out his plan. Sure, Itsuka said, obviously not convinced. Izuku turned back to face her with his sticks at the ready, and Hitomi gulped. Sure, he'd hit her before, but that was his hand. These were twin sticks he had obviously had some practice with, while she had no training in boxing, or in any type of combat really. She had the strength advantage, but he had experience. This wouldn't be easy. Ready? Itsuka asked, standing between them. Izuku nodded while Hitomi groaned but raised her fists. Then begin. And Izuku was just as annoying in combat as Hitomi had believed he would be, as he skipped over to her and bopped her on the head with one of his foam sticks. The strike didn't even faze her, but well, she couldn't even move as Izuku somehow bopped her, dodged even though she hadn't thrown a single punch, and asked if she needed a break. And Itsuka quickly reined Izuku into a more manageable state. Now he just dodged Hitomi, who Itsuka had coached in how to throw a decent punch. Yet to his credit, Izuku never once just let Hitomi hit him. She actually had to try. But she quickly threw in the towel and gave up. Not on training. She was far too afraid of how Izuku would try to convince her to stick with it if she wanted to succeed and be a hero. Then she sat down and watched as Izuku and Itsuku decided to take the ring next. Hitomi watched as Izuku walked off while Itsuka began wrapping her hands in tape. Then her eyes went wide as Izuku came back with two wooden eskrima sticks. Itsuka took an advanced karate stance and Izuku just kinda wobbled from left to right. After a few seconds Izuku whistled and quickly jumped forward trying to hit Itsuka, who pushed his stick away and kicked him in the ribs. Izuku fell backwards onto his neck and just flipped back onto his feet, not even looking like he was hurt. He placed the sticks on the ground. Whoopsie, I forgot to stretch, he stated, and then he lifted up his left leg, putting it behind his head, his arms behind his back, and just stretched. After he popped something, Izuku stopped stretching and took his sticks and just started wobbling again. This time Itsuka started by lunging forward and trying to judo toss Izuku. She managed to grab his arm, but after she'd thrown him he twisted his body in midair so he'd bent the arm she'd grabbed, landed on one foot and used both his arms to pull her forward while his other leg shot straight upwards, catching her in the chin, which she took before she threw him over her back. Izuku hit the mat again but just got back to his feet. He leapt at Itsuka's back swing with his left arm, but she dodged, and aimed a palm strike at his head, and Izuku whistled as he twisted his right leg and stomped on Itsuka's thigh. The strike was like lightning, and Itsuka hadn't expected it, and even though she looked like she'd barely felt it, it diverted her strike just enough that when Izuku dropped to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, her attack missed him. He just rolled over and with a quick whistle gave her a lightning fast double stomp to her stomach, which pushed her back slightly, so Izuku twisted both feet over his head and placed both on the floor and then twisted his body back up, with both sticks hitting Itsuka in the head. He tried quickly beating her with the sticks, putting a few high-powered attacks in. While Itsuka just blocked, Izuku tried baiting out her counter by throwing his sticks in the air and aiming a punch to her rib. But Itsuka caught it. He twisted his other arm trying to hit her neck, but she caught that too. Izuku kicked straight up trying to kick her chin, but Itsuka leaned back and held his leg in between her chin and her shoulder. Izuku tried jumping with his one free limb to roll over her, but Itsuka used the momentum to suplex him. Then after quickly letting him go, Itsuka pinned him against the floor. He tried struggling but couldn't escape. Wow, Itsuka-senpai, I actually lasted 20 seconds against you this time. His poor choice of words had Setsuna spitting out her water and laughing. Oh, grow up Togake, Naoko chided with a blush. But he said, she said in between laughs. I know, we heard him, Naoko stated, it's not that funny. Setsuna smirked. Bet the reason she didn't use her giant hands was because he'd finish far too easily. Naoko groaned. Izuku shot up. It is, he exclaimed, she'd have finished me way earlier if she used her quirk. Itsuka, Hitomi, Naoko, and everyone else in earshot blushed, except for Setsuna, who just laughed much harder. Izuku just stood there with a large grin on his face, not exactly sure why everyone was looking at him like that. Then in her shock, Izuku walked over holding his phone. Hey Hitomi, can I see your phone for a second? Sure. Boop. Izuku said as he tapped his phone against hers, and Hitomi watched in horror as the words, "Contact information shared with Izuku Midoriya," popped onto her screen. Before she could say anything, Itsuka's alarm went off. Class starts in 10 minutes, she said. Quickly she typed out a message and sent it. Izuku and Naoko's phones buzzed, but neither checked their messages. Itsuka offered her phone to Hitomi. Here, tap mine so you can tell me when he starts bothering you. Hitomi nodded dumbly and tapped Itsuka's phone. Contact information shared with Itsuka Kendo. Thanks, she said. Don't worry about it, she said, leaning close so she could whisper. I know he can be a bit much for new people, but he is just trying to help, she said. Well, see you later, Hitomi-senpai, Izuku said as he and other students seemed to leave in unison. Call me when you wanna continue training. Hitomi meekly waved back to him. Then she sighed, looking down at her phone. She opened her contacts. Mum, Dad, Izuku, and Itsuka were the only ones there. She didn't know how to feel about that. She did know that her body was screaming for rest though, so she started walking back to her room since she had the rest of the day off anyway. As she did, she thought about the differences between her practice with Izuku and him sparring with Itsuka, and for the first time since she'd gotten to UA, a bit of hope welled in her chest. Maybe my quirk isn't the reason I wasn't placed in the hero class, she said as she went to change her clothes. After the entirety of 1B finished their classes, they set in for the night, and again they split up. Each had a leader. Each leader had something they were drilling. The leaders were Pony Tsunotori, who took her group to watch anime and talk about manga, not that one, but never forget, manga, Class 1B. I like men now, manga from Class 1B. Setsuna Tokage, who had unsurprisingly fallen in love with the very concept of wrestling and formed a group devoted to binging it and discussing plotlines. Narengeki Shota, who didn't lead a group but he was an amazing tutor, so those who wanted better grades championed him as their leader and dubbed him the savior of free time. They also sometimes took a small break to watch hero fights and discuss what should be done to prevent damage and save people, since everybody wanted to be a hero and it prevented those who were really bored from just falling asleep. And while it wasn't a group, Reiko had a blog about haunted locations that pretty much everyone followed. And finally was Komori's group, which Izuku was part of. They sat down in Izuku Abara's room. The group was small. It had Komori the leader, Izuku the vice county captain, Jirota Shishida club treasurer because he really treasured the time he spent with his friends Reiko the somewhat interested partaker, and two new members. The first was Shihei Kuwaro, who'd been trying to join for a while because he had a crush on Komori, not realizing she was gay, and Yui who'd been dragged by Izuku, well Izuku and Itsuka who insisted she needed to make more friends, and the most unofficial member Abara who was always there but never participated. They used Izuku's large taiko drum as a table. Komori grinned as she stared at the two new members. "Welcome everyone, I'm glad to announce we have new members in our little guild," she giggled darkly. "Hey guys," Shihei said coolly, trying to mask his nervousness. "Hi," Yui said disinterestedly. "You all know us as Komori," she said, introducing herself. "Izuku," the vice co-captain said with a cheer. "Jirota," the large hairy teen said with a grin. "And I'm Ryaku," the ghoulish gal beeped like, well a ghost might be assumed to do. "But tonight we are the group except the new players," and Komori held up pieces of paper. "I'm Vividia, the female harpy double spear-wielding lawful evil paladin." "I go by Nor, lawful good goblin rouge," Jirota stated. "And I'm Flan the true neutral necromancer," Reiko said without her ghoulish beep. "And I'm," Jirota lifted Komori up as she exclaimed, "your dungeon master." She giggled before being set down. "So did you two finish your character sheets?" "Yeah, it was easy with your help, Komori," Shihei said. "I'm Alo, the druid," he said. Yui held up hers. "I'm Itsuka Kendo, I'm a lawful good monk, and I always butt into my friends' conflicts and get them to play wyverns and towers because they talked to someone else once." Everyone felt nervous but Izuku laughed. "Ha, good one Kodai-san, you should show that to Itsuka, I bet she'd love it." "Thanks Izuku, I thought it would remove any tension about me being here," she said as monotone as always, but nobody else laughed so maybe they don't get it. "It's fine," Izuku said, "they just haven't got your sense of humor yet." "By the way, is Abara playing?" Yui asked, "and when is Naoko getting here?" "No, Abara is still not convinced W&T doesn't lead to satanic powers," Jirota said. They turned to Abara who wore a cross and sat next to a Bible. "What?" she asked, closing her gardening magazine. "Just cause nobody's been possessed yet doesn't mean they won't be." "That reminds me," Izuku said looking down at his school uniform. He cried, ripping his clothes off, revealing a shrine maiden outfit underneath. "I'm ready to stop the possession, senpai," he smiled. "Glad someone else is cautious," Abara said, going back to her magazine. "And Naoko is not in our group," Reiko said. "She used to be, but she didn't like the game and left." "She gave us her character sheets," Izuku said as he held 3 character sheets to his chest. "Avon the Wizard, Og the Birdie Bard, and Malog the Mysterious, you'll all be missed." "Hear, hear," Jirota agreed, while Komori nodded solemnly. "Anyway," Komori said, "now we have to continue our quest from last time." She cleared her throat. Vividia, Nor, and Flan awaken in their respective tents, to the sound of fire being stoked. She looked around the table. "What do you do?" Izuku growled. The sheer anger behind it surprised the new players. "How dare they start a fire?" he asked, having changed his voice to an high-pitched aggressive female voice. "If it burns down the forest that'd break the law," he stated in what was apparently Vividia's voice. "I grab my spears, and leap out into the darkness ready to skewer the scum who dares burn the forest." Jirota said in a gruff low-pitched voice. "I know that Psycho Harpy'll take thing way too far," he groaned using Nor's voice. "I'll get my knives, and prepare to stealthily leave my tent, ready to knock somebody unconscious." Everyone turned to Reiko who said with a Valley Girl voice, "Like I totally cast Raise the Dead. After all that crazy girl will like totally murderize everyone she sees, and then I roll over and grab my staff, saying gosh can that nutball take like a week off. I need my beauty sleep," Reiko said rolling the dice. "Like 15, totes good for me." Komori grinned. The new players were stunned. 2 people were playing characters nobody thought they would. She cleared her voice. "As you all leave your tents you see it's Agaricus Bisporus, the helpful god who's been guiding your quest." "Like of course it is. Never a 15 when you need one," Reiko rolled her eyes. "I stop my attack, since if you cannot trust a god not to burn down a forest, who can you trust not to?" Izuku asked. Jirota smiled. "As group leader I approach Agaricus, and greet her, I try charming her and ask how well our next job pays. Roll for charisma, Komori said. Jirota rolls a 6. Komori smirks. You forgot your pants inside and stand before the all-powerful god in your goblin boxers, but Agaricus doesn't notice. How's that a bad roll? Shihai asked Yui, who shrugged. Streaking is against the law. Izuku growled, then he rolled some dice. I throw my spear to beat the ground next to Nor. Izuku checked the dice and grinned evilly. 20. He laughed and yammered on crazily about how the law was on his side and he'd slaughter all who stood against it. Komori checked the dice and nodded. You aim as true Lady Nutjob. The spear strikes the ground. I loom over him and say, I won't skewer you this time, but I will next time. Yeah, keep your knickers on, Jirota said, faking a yawn. I get my pants on and listen to the god. Komori smiled and said in an echoing yet quiet voice, Hello my party, I have come to you with 2 new members. Behold, Lo and Itsuka Kendo. Komori threw some mushrooms like they were confetti. 2 large mushrooms opened out of the ground and the new characters formed out of them. Are they good? Izuku asked. His fingers twitched in rage. I'll show them no mercy if they've broken the law. Then Izuku changed to his normal voice and whispered, Don't worry guys, I wouldn't actually do that. He winked. Reiko rolled her eyes. Like whatever dude, we get it. You're a psycho, she said. Let the new guys talk, crazy pants. Shihai cleared his throat. Hi, I'm the Low Druid, he said. I mean I'm Low the Druid. Sorry, that lady scares me. Join the club. We're having jackets stitched, Jirota joked in his Nor voice. And suddenly all eyes were on Yui. It was her turn to introduce herself. Hey, I'm Itsuka. Good to meet you all. I'll try to keep you safe in combat. Everyone in the room stared at Yui. The reason? Because she spoke almost exactly like Itsuka, except for one thing. She talked like Kendo was as monotone as Yui was, and hearing Itsuka's naturally passionate and caring voice entirely monotone was odd. Whoa Kendo senpai, you sounded just like Itsuka senpai, Izuku said. Yui smiled and mimicking Izuku's voice, again perfectly monotone, said, Wow, thanks Izuku, I'm glad somebody likes my voices. How'd you do that? Izuku asked. Lots of practice, Yui said, thankfully in her own monotone voice. Well, now we should take a break and explain our characters, co-vice captain. Right, Izuku said, standing up. He held up Vividia's character sheet and used the character's voice. Vividia was raised in a harpy commune till the Rs came. He held his head as if he were in pain and said, They killed many, and the rest were going to be forced to carrying their war machines, or just for labor. He cringed slightly, and in a weak and pained tone said, My wings. He looked at his arms and spoke. They tied me down and pulled every single feather off. He trembled, the pain was maddening. And I wasn't the only, they did it too. If you weren't supposed to fly, you couldn't fly, they decided. Then a menacing and honestly creepy smile split Izuku's face as he described the RS getting slaughtered by a platoon of guards, one of which found his character, and since they couldn't find her parents adopted her. The captain raised me to know the true weight of peace, how evil must be slaughtered to usher in an era of peace. I may not have hands, and I can't fly, but his spear and mine fit in my still sharp talons. Thus I do the will of the law, and will die fighting for the smiles of the people who judge me a monster, he stated. I guess I'll go next, Jirota said. I am Nor Goblin Thief. And I used to be just like you'd imagine a goblin thief to be. Until the day I robbed the wrong people, wealthy aristocrats who seemed no more threatening than any other. But I made a mistake and nearly paid with my life as a crossbow bolt tore through my shoulder. I passed out cursing my luck, and awoke in the stables. He spoke with a smile. That's when I met her. Her name was Cran and she was just a for the lord in the manor. Yet she'd taken pity on me and hid me from the aristocrats and hidden me while she nursed me back to good health. His smile turned sour as he told of the atrocities committed against the woman. How she used to be a maid, but after the lord harassed her she'd been forcibly indebted to them by the courts. How she'd had 2 of the lord's illegitimate children and the lady of the manor loved to torment her. So, I knew things had to change, and I forced them to. He frowned slightly. Only problem was I'd fallen for the poor maiden. And I hated her thinking poorly of me, and I knew if I killed the lord and lady she'd never speak to me again. Thus I snuck into the house and using my stealth and trickery I convinced them that the goblin they'd killed was now a ghost and was after revenge against them. That as long as they lived I'd haunt their perfect manor long after they died and chased them out. Cran got a new home and out of her old job and I left because she needed a fortune to convince the courts that she was an heiress. She spent the old owner's money and I left to procure more funds for her, so she can feed everyone in the manor, pay for staff, and keep the old lord and lady off her property. Reiko grinned. Like guess it's my turn. She flipped her hair. So when I was 6 I had a bunny rabbit. I called her Lady Fluffypants cause she had white fur on most of her body, but black on her legs and waist like she was wearing fluffy pants. She even looked like she had little furry white socks. Reiko gushed about her imaginary bunny. Then she was mauled by a werecat. So I turned to necromancy to raise her from the dead. Reiko thought for a second. Oh yeah, and I beat that werecat to death with a frying pan. Then she looked sad, but she was a mama werecat and I had to watch as this cute little kitty walked out of the bushes and well I decided to adopt it and since I was already gonna raise my bunny bestie I mighty as well raise the mommy werecat too. Then Reiko pouted, but if she mauls my bestie again I'll beat her to death with her own arms next time. After the three had finished speaking Shihai looked confused. Wait, you guys have backstories? Were we supposed to have those? Yui asked. Komori frowned. Then she leaned back in her chair. Then she sighed. Yes, you were. Jirota leaned forward to see the new members' sheets. They don't have stats or items either. Komori looked around at the table members. But, my dungeon, she pouted. Did we ruin the session? Shihai asked nervously. Technically we did, Jirota stated. This was supposed to be session 0, but we finished our last campaign so, he sheepishly admitted. What session is this then? 2, Izuku said, but what if the new players take over our characters with us helping them? He suggested. Komori's eyes lit up. Jirota said, interesting suggestion co-vice captain. Yes, Komori shouted. Izuku's a tank healer you all team with him, and Shihai wanted a druid so hell partner up with Reiko. Sure, Izuku grinned. Fine with me, Reiko said. That leaves me the leader unaffected, Jirota said with a nod. Also it gives me a new idea for a dungeon, Komori giggled. Then Komori rolled back before the new characters were introduced and stated that Vividia and Flan's bodies were semi-taken over by new characters' souls since the new souls were trapped inside a dungeon with a powerful monster and had fled to find the nearest bodies to help. Problem was the druid didn't realize they'd have to have contact with their original bodies before daybreak or else they'd be stuck like this forever. Fortunately the dungeon was really close, so after some excellent roleplay about how Itsuka found it hard to move in Vividia's body and how weirded out Lo was about being in a girl's body nor offered to help the two understand his comrades' bodies as they scoured the dungeon which Komori explained would have been a cakewalk if Vividia and Flan had their souls, but the two new characters had no idea how to use them. Above board Izuku, Jirota, and Reiko advised Yui and Shihai on what they could do but left decisions up to them, and they enjoyed the game. Shihai seemed to enjoy the role-playing while Yui seemed to adore the combat. Eventually they found their original caged bodies. Flan screamed out that to run and soon they understood why. The monster was a bone dragon, and the boss was a necromancer. Vividia ordered them to kill both and she'd ignore the body thievery that they committed. After an amazing boss encounter where the necromancer hid inside the bone dragon's maw and the party had to smash it so they could attack the necromancer when he fell out, eventually the party destroyed the dragon's corpse but the necromancer escaped by causing a cave-in. The party was reunited. They escaped and switched their bodies back at the cave, where they introduced themselves and the session ended. The rest of the time was spent with the W&T group helping the new players understand the game, their characters, their skills, and helping suggest backstories. And then the group left and Izuku and Abara started getting ready for bed, and sleep came easily enough for the 1B class, well except Izuku. He was in bed and had his eyes closed, but he just waited for Abara to fall asleep, and after she did he opened his eyes and laid there. Nights were boring when you couldn't sleep. He wondered again what dreams were like. They'd been explained to him but they just sounded weird. He wondered what he'd dream about if he could. That's what he thought about. A few hours must have passed before he heard a gasp and a groan. He turned, and frowned. It's happening again, he said. Abara's hair had spread along the floor. Let him go, she pleaded sleepily. Izuku pushed the covers off of him and crouched. I don't have anything, so hype won't work as effectively, he thought. Stop it, Abara sleepily demanded. Don't take him. Her hair pushed against the bed, lifting her up. Leave her alone, her hair raised. Gotta time this right, he thought. Leave them alone. Abara screamed, her hair lashed out, trying to smash her nightmares. Izuku whistled and leapt onto the wall, but she turned and raised her hand at him. I'll stop you, she said. Izuku hype jumped to the opposite wall, dodging the thorny hair that sliced through his jammies. Moore tried snaring him when he landed, but he leapt to the wall behind Abara and stood right on her hair. He bit his lip to stop the cry of pain out of fear of waking her up, even as her hair wrapped around his foot. Anger turned to sobs and the thorns retreated into Abara's hair as she just broke down. I'm sorry, she cried. Her hair retracted and Izuku hit the floor. He looked up. Abara had curled herself into a ball and sobbed, I'm sorry. Izuku let out a breath of relief, and stood up. He walked over to her and hugged her. It's okay, big sis, he whispered, you didn't know what they were gonna do. I should have stopped them, she cried, wrapping him into a hug. I let them kill you. She sounded so weak, so guilty when she said that. No, you would have stopped them, it's not your fault. She just continued crying, and soon enough she went limp, and Izuku knew the nightmare was over. He laid her back in bed and left the room quickly and quietly. The room was soundproof, so nobody had woken up despite Abara's dream rampage. Izuku stared down at his foot and hummed a tune. The best he could do with so little was stop the bleeding. The pain hadn't gone. He let out a breath. Izuku? Abara asked. He panicked and opened the door. A now awake Abara was over his bed staring down at the fact he was gone. Hey Abara-senpai, he smiled. Her head turned to him and her hair wrapped around him, pulling him over to her. Where did you go? She sobbed as she held him. I woke up and why you were gone. J just needed to stretch my legs, Izuku lied. He hated lying, but he knew how bad she'd feel if she knew. She frowned. And no, never mind. She shook her head. That's inappropriate of me to ask. I don't mind, he said. Why you won't think less of me? She asked, or think I'm being crass. Why would I? He asked. May I sleep in your bed? She asked. She sounded ashamed of herself. Izuku just smiled, sure. Abara set Izuku down and he climbed into his bed. She stared down at him, wondering if this really was a good idea, but he smiled, it's fine. She nodded, and laid next to him. Then she wrapped him into a hug. His heartbeat gently lulled her to rest. Izuku just laid there. There wasn't much else he could do. He couldn't sleep anyway. Then he realized something. Abara was holding onto him in her sleep. She was hugging him for dear life as she slept. Steam blew out of his ears as his face went red. Abara slept peacefully. Izuku dazed through the night as a girl held him close. Besides, he hated her having nightmares. If hugging her solved it, he'd try to do that next time she had one. Abara woke up bright and early, and when her eyes opened, she saw that in her sleep she'd wrapped her arms around Izuku. Her face went beet red and slowly she removed her arms from around him. Then she slipped out of bed. His bed, she screeched internally, and moved over to the bathroom, and quietly entered. Abara walked over to the mirror and stared at herself. She'd become a temptress, luring a boy into her bed. She felt so ashamed of herself. I even coiled around him like a serpent in my sleep, she thought, turning on the tap. She splashed her face with water. I betrayed Naoko's trust in me. She told me about her feelings with Izuku, obvious as they already were, but she told me about them because she didn't want anything between our friendship. And yet, worse of all, Izuku Midoriya was a nice and polite boy, one who she felt was a trusted friend to her, but that was as deep as her feelings for him went. She wasn't interested in making him her boyfriend, or husband, and therefore she'd tempted a boy she had no intention of staying with. As she looked up at herself again, she realized something. She still had her nightie on, and Izuku still had his PJs on when she'd slid out of his bed. She gave a sigh of relief. Good, she said to herself. It seems I still had some sense in me after all. She couldn't believe she'd even asked to share his bed. Bad dreams or not, that was highly inappropriate, Abara, she stated to herself. Abara. Izuku called from the other room, "Are you okay?" he asked. Fine Izuku," she said, "why wouldn't I be?" "I don't know, but your hair is kinda everywhere," Izuku said. "My hair?" Obara asked. She checked her reflection again, and true to Izuku's word, her hair truly was everywhere: the walls, the floor, the shower railing, the sink, and crawling into the other room. Sorry. She cried, reeling it all back. A loud thump was heard as Izuku's head hit and pushed open the door due to him being tangled up in her hair. "Ow." Izuku whined lightly, then he smiled up at her. "Morning Obara," he said, "can you put some toothpaste and water on my toothbrush and pass it down to me?" He asked. "I'm kinda stuck down here." "I am so sorry Izuku," Obara said, forcing her hair to release the tied boy, who stood up and smiled. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Why yes, fine," she said with a blush. "I mean just fine, it was just fine," she said, then she groaned in frustration and embarrassment. "I'm sorry," Izuku said, thinking that she was embarrassed due to his question. "You're fine, it's just," she sighed. "Last night, we shouldn't have done that," she stated. "Done what?" Izuku asked. Obara blushed. Do I really have to explain this?" She took a breath. "You know, we slept together." Izuku thought for a few moments. Why shouldn't we have done that?" he asked. "Because you're a boy and I'm a girl," Obara stated, "and boys and girls shouldn't share a bed unless they're married," she said. "We shouldn't?" Izuku asked, "but you slept better, right?" "And never mind that," Obara stated. "Let's brush our teeth and get ready." "Oh okay." Obara silently screamed at herself as they brushed their teeth, and when she was done she bolted out of the bathroom, quickly got dressed and exited the room. Class 1B's kitchen was typically pretty loud in mornings, groans from lazy teens who'd just been pulled from bed, the bright and cheerful morning people running around trying to help. And that's how Obara started acting through the day. Which was noticed by everyone, not that she was helping, but that she was being too helpful. Suspicion was raised on both of the green-haired roommates, and then, just kinda dropped with a laugh at the absurdity of the situation, because as Setsuna loved proving Izuku could barely talk to girls before getting overheated. And Obara was just as unlikely to have caused any problems. Being sheltered, raised by a convent, having a religious upbringing, it made it difficult to tell who could have been in the wrong between them. And only Naoko found it easy to choose a side. Her exact words were, "Nothing against Obara, but I know Izuku much better than her. I'd bet my life on the fact he's not in the wrong." Yet no matter how much the others agreed with her, they also couldn't see Obara in the wrong. This led up to their hero lesson. Normally you were lucky to stand with people you know, but as Class 1B noticed, despite being stood directly next to one another, Izuku and Obara never spoke a word to each other. Smentos frowned as he looked at the fist imprint in the wall. One question was on his mind: why? It was a simple question, and it was a reasonable question. Did he know who'd done this? Yes, he did. Was he going to bill her for damages? He already had. But just the sight of it caused him to groan. He raised his hand and filled in the mark. Then he turned to leave. Why she keeps coming back just to damage school property, I'll never understand. He was thankful Aizawa had informed him about the mark. Apparently, he'd noticed it because a green-haired boy put his fist in it for some reason. Smentos shook his head and wandered away, hoping that this was the only mark she'd left. When she'd been a student, the school had to be constantly checked for any and all damage she might have left. Octopus later that day. Octopus. The entirety of Class 1B were all in their hero costumes on a bus heading to the unforeseen disaster joint. Izuku was practically bouncing in his seat. "Chill Izuku," Itsuka said, putting a hand on his head. "But Senpai, I'm just so excited," he said with a grin. He pulled a brochure out of his happy coat. "Have you even read this?" he asked, opening it. "It's a brochure for UA's USJ. The unforeseen disaster joint, designed to simulate all kinds of—" "Let me guess," Shihai interjected, "unforeseen disasters." Yosetsu nodded super fast. "That's right Shihai," he grinned, giving a thumbs up. "It's super dangerous, the perfect place to practice some support hero skills," he said before tightening his headband. "And I've been practicing, so this time I'm going all out from the start," he stated. "No way my rival will surpass me this week." Okay, we're all excited, Itsuka said, but relax guys, you don't want to waste your energy in the bus, she chided, hands on her hips. And as usual she received a chorus of, yes, big sis, as they milled about talking to each other. Mostly as a distraction, Naoko noticed, why? Cause of two people in particular not talking to each other, Izuku and Obara. It was clear that when they both left their room something was wrong between the two. Obara would often just hold her hands in front of her and stare down at her shoes. While the normally talkative Izuku seemed not to notice that his female roommate wasn't speaking to him, and stranger that as friendly as he wasn't trying to talk to her despite the fact she was on his left side, yet never once even glanced in his direction, nor had she answered a question he had, or did anything more than stare down at her clasped hands that trembled. The entire class had known something had gone on between the two, but neither would say what, and honestly the class had already had several meetings about it, the end result. No single member of their class could imagine what had occurred between them, which of them might be in the wrong, and which one needed support. The idea that the overly excited boy who blew smoke out of his ears when a girl drew too close to him doing something inappropriate to his female roommate was ridiculous. Especially since UA had extensively tested him for any form of deviancy before he was allowed to share a room with a girl. In short, UA staff weren't sure if Izuku even knew that storks didn't deliver babies to their parents, and as Setsuna could attest he was very easily flustered, hence why he was her preferred target for her more risque humor, or just saying the words boobs to his face, whichever she felt like doing in the moment. Obara on the other hand was just as unlikely to have caused an issue. She didn't object to having a male roommate, in fact her exact words were, "I'd rather share a room with a boy than nobody at all." But everybody in 1B knew she couldn't sleep in a room alone, due to two reasons. First, she was raised in a church in a small room with other kids, girls and boys, so she had trouble even getting to sleep on her own, and when she did she sometimes had night terrors. One bad one Naoko remembered had Komori running around screaming Obara had gone missing in the night. Naoko shivered as she remembered the entirety of the class and whatever teachers they could find entered their classmates' room and found something out of a horror novel: scratched walls, shredded bedsheets, and a broken window. The idea that in their sleep, while in a place they were supposed to be under immense security, that one of their classmates had disappeared and left such destruction horrified them all. It took them all searching for 2 hours until Setsuna had found Obara. She was on the roof in a torn nightgown, sobbing in her sleep and clutching onto a bin, promising to keep it safe. When she awoke, her entire class was given a short bit of history of their barbed-haired Christian classmate. Two of her family from her church, a brother and sister, had been adopted by two seemingly nice people, and shortly after they were arrested. Obara refused to speak about the children that had been adopted. But Naoko noticed that after they had been informed a slight bit about Shiozaki's past, how Komori's face scrunched up in a fearsome mix of horror and realization. She shook her head clean of that. It wasn't her business unless Obara told her about what happened. Prying any further would just open old wounds. Point was, two of her classmates who were also roommates were not talking to each other, and that was a mystery Naoko needed to get to the bottom of, and because it was based around her weakness, Izuku Midoriya, a boy she hadn't spent a day in her life since she met him where he wasn't at the forefront of her mind. And partially cause Obara looked like she had a crush, which was an admittedly irrational and selfish thought on the blonde copying teen's part, but Naoko, despite how bitter her thoughts made her sound, thoughts that threw curses at the sweet green-haired girl, that questioned if her classmates were blind when they first asked what Izuku might have done to upset Obara, instead of the other way around. Of course she wasn't safe from her own thoughts either. Thoughts that reminded her of how sweet both Obara and Izuku were. And how better off he'd be with any other girl in his class than with Naoko herself, the same thoughts that made her instantly make enemies with the girls around Izuku. In some ways, and she hated herself for thinking this, she looked down at her white knuckles that had been clenched ever since she'd gotten on the bus, but she was almost happy that Izuku wasn't talking to Obara. Every day Naoko doubted she had the strength others had when their own crush turned them down. Naoko before Izuku was a scared and spite-filled creature. She wanted to go to UA not because being a hero was her dream, not because her family needed money, not even to research her unique quirk. No, Naoko originally dreamed of going to UA because she wanted to look down on the people who made fun of her quirk, not simply to prove them wrong, but because she wanted to laugh in their faces if she ever saw them again. She wasn't very nice, and she still had trouble being nice to others. Of course, she thought, turning her gaze to her favorite boy in the entire world. When your world crashes both literally and figuratively and one person somehow manages to bring color back into your life, maybe it isn't so crazy how important that person will become to you. Naoko shook her head. Don't focus on Izuku, she chided herself. After all, she had a different goal today. When the bus stopped, everyone got their gear and stood in front of the large building, and as planned, Izuku and Obara still stood together. Yet Izuku just sat on the floor trying to open his support gear box, and Obara held her hands together and stared away from him. Even the new teacher 13 seemed to notice. But Naoko watched them intently. Izuku was about to shout in surprise and Obara had to react to him. Everyone else knew about it, so the only ones that would react were Izuku and Obara. Finally, after a time, Izuku finally popped the case open. Alright, now let me get my... He stopped and stared into the case for a few seconds. Where's my drums? He cried. Obara recoiled in horror and blurted out, I'm sorry, Naoko. Everyone turned to Obara, who panted heavily. Me? Naoko asked the vine-haired girl who refused to meet her gaze. Itsuka gave Naoko a look. Naoko nodded and walked over to Obara. Come on, Obara, she said gently, and both got back onto the bus to talk. As they got on, Izuku stood back up. Are we? No, they're just taking a break, Izuku, Kon-sensei said. Perhaps we all should. He suggested. Izuku nodded and opened his case. Weird, he said. His thick wooden drumsticks were also gone, replaced by what looked to be carbon fiber rods that were about the length of his old sticks. He pulled one out. It was strangely about the same weight as his old sticks despite being much thinner. On one end they had an odd shape that almost looked like. As his hand moved down the hilt, a jolt of lightning enveloped the tip. Surprised, he dropped it and it started rolling away because they were on a hill. Izuku placed his case down and ran after it. If I lose it, Yue might put my mom in debt, he said, trying to encourage himself to run faster. Halfway his stick stopped and he smiled, just in time to trip over the large crab that had apparently caught his stick. As Izuku toppled over the crab was pulled down with him. Izuku tried to grab the crab so it wouldn't get hurt so much as they rolled down the hill. I'll feel that tomorrow, Izuku groaned as he tried getting back to his feet. Just then he noticed one of the crab's legs had been hurt. Oh no, he gasped, rolling back to his feet. He picked up the large crab and stopped as he looked into its eyes. Or rather, its eye and the Christmas light sticking out from under its shell where its eye stalk should be. As Izuku studied the crab, he realized that it wasn't exactly a crab, but rather a cyborg crab that seemed to be glaring at him. So cool. He grinned, then he shook his head. But you're bleeding. Izuku set the crab down gently and pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket, which he gently tied around the crab's leg. There we go, he said with a smile. Then he held it tightly. That'll only hurt for a second, he said before he purses his lips and whistled. Green lighting coursed over Izuku's body and then the crab's, healing its leg right up. There, sorry I had to hold you, but I don't know your name. Sorry about that, he bowed slightly. The crab held a claw up which still held Izuku's stick in it. Thanks, Crab-san. Sorry about your leg. It dropped the stick into his hand and started walking away. Izuku, are you all right? Jirota asked as he picked the smaller boy up off the road. You really took a tumble, didn't you? He asked, taking a look at his friend's arm. There were several cuts in his skin and blood was leaking out. Oh no, he gasped, grabbing his friend and pulling him back to the bus. Kon-sensei, he cried, Izuku is injured. He cried. Quickly he opened Izuku's support gear box. Here, use yo. His eyes went wide. Where are your drums? He asked Izuku. No idea, Izuku said. They weren't in the case when I opened it. I can answer this, Kon said as he walked over. He handed Jirota a greasy note. On the note was messily scrawled, sorry I broke your drums. I made your sticks better, May. Pardon? Jirota asked. Izuku, perchance do you know who this May person is? May, Izuku asked. He thought for a second but nobody came to mind. Can't think of anyone with that name. Then why was she messing with your equipment? Jirota asked loudly, drawing the attention of the other teams. And sensei, why are you so unperturbed? Without recovery girl Izuku's the only professionally rated healer able to assist should something go awry with our training. Because Mei is in support course, she's well known by all teachers and these notes are often given to teachers when she looks for inspiration. And also cause I came prepared. Vlad King walked over to the bus and opened the storage door showing a large selection of wearable Shime Taiko drums. Hey, those are like the drums I used to wear, Izuku said as Khan attached a belt of them to him. Use these for now, I'll handle getting replacements, Khan said as Izuku used the stick he had and hyped himself back to good health. Ah, much better, he smiled. Izuku, Noako roared and she stomped out of the bus. She growled and then latched onto the green-haired boy. How could you? She asked sadly, hugging him tightly. After a few minutes Ibara stepped off the bus. She gave a sorrow-filled gaze back to Noako and Izuku before she looked straight down. The teachers shared a look. Maybe we should start now, 13 asked uncertainly. And all were too eager to get inside, though Noako didn't let go of Izuku. Every few seconds he could swear she was sniffling into his happy coat. As 13 started on her lecture of the USJ's functions, Izuku felt drained, possibly due to his drums being destroyed, Ibara being weird with him all day, and Noako now clinging to him and refusing to tell him what was wrong. Thus rather than sit and listen to 13 like the others, Izuku instead studied the large field trying to figure out what it was for dragging Noako with him. Maybe it simulates earthquakes. He thought to himself, his eyes scanned the area trying to discern its purpose. Then he noticed a black swirling portal opening, and stepping out was a person, a large man, and a black mist. Izuku turned, and there was a break in the conversation, so he asked, Miss 13, who are the guys who came through the portal? The woman turned to him and walked over. Guys who came through the portal? She asked, sounding confused. When she stood next to him she stared down at the field. Oh no, she said, watching as more portals formed and opened letting more people walk through them. Khan, she called, I think we should run. Run, a deep voice that swirled all around them asked. Izuku turned back to see the black mist had somehow surrounded them. I'm afraid that just wouldn't do. Who are you? Vlad King asked. Apologies Vlad King. 13, children, I am Kurogiri, and you're all our bait, the swirling black mist stated. Bait? 13 asked. For who? All Might. The mist seemed to narrow its eyes at them. It's been decided that he will be the one to reveal the existence of the League of Villains to the world. Tetsu gritted his teeth and as his body turned to steel he charged toward the mist, like you'll get the. But his collar was caught by Vlad King who threw him back. You're not invincible, he stated. Huddle together and stay safe. You aren't pro-heroes so we'll handle this. Blood poured out of his knuckles. Wait for an opening and then run. I don't think that's going to be possible Khan-sensei, Itsuka said as the mist started swarming her and the other students. Izuku turned around. There's nowhere to go. Tetsu turned his arm to steel. Nowhere but into the mist. Then with a shout Tetsu charged into the mist and straight into a portal. Izuku's ears perked up as he heard the shout coming from outside the mist. He's outside? He asked. He put a hand up to his ear, but he's much further away. But he's alive, right? Itsuka asked. Izuku nodded. I'm certain he is. Then perhaps Kurogiri has a teleporting quirk, Shota suggested. Any suggestions? Kojira asked. Itsuka look around. Buddy up and run through the mist, but be sure to follow each other. Izuku looked to his left and right. On one side was Noako still holding him and the other was Setsuna Tokage. Izuku was about to take Setsuna's arm and run forward, but Noako frowned. Come on Izuku. She growled and dragged him through a portal. As they reached the other side Noako screamed, as they started falling out of the sky. Why are we falling? She asked with a scream. I don't kn oof. Izuku gasped as his back hit snow. Huh. Izuku looked up. The portal was a few feet above them, but underneath them was a mountain. Are we dead yet? Noako asked as she sat up. Not yet, Izuku responded as she pulled him to his feet. Nearby there was a pair of legs sticking out of the mountain, kicking and wriggling around as the person they belonged to kicked the air trying to free themselves. Quickly green lightning surrounded Noako and she pulled Tetsu from out of the snow. Ah ha ha. I'm finally free, he roared. He looked up at the two of them, Midori bro and Mono bro. What are you two doing here? He asked seeing them. We fell, Naoko stated, and again I'm a girl. I fell too. Tetsu laughed. He jumped to his feet and peered around. Alright, well, with Midori bro and Mono bro here with me, the brother guy spirit is rising. Making my manliness rise yet another level higher. He flexed powerfully, then raised an arm to Naoko. Wanna help me pound these crappy villains flat, Mono bro? I'm a girl, she shouted. Then she sighed. But sure, she said, taking his hand. Just then they heard people approaching. People are coming, Izuku said. Then start up the drums, Midori bro. Let the brother guy spirit flow through you. Tetsu roared. With you behind me I'm unstoppable, Naoko stated lovingly. Then she glared at him. But I'm still mad at you. You are? Izuku asked. Why? Tetsu looked from Izuku to Naoko. Then he wrapped his arm around Izuku and pulled him close. Listen, Midori bro, if a man's a man, then he takes care of all his responsibilities, yeah. Why yeah? Izuku said uncertainly. Then you gotta take care of all your important people. Sun Tzu said that, Tetsu stated with a nod. No he didn't, Naoko roared. Ha ha, he also brimmed with that brother guy spirit. Tetsu stated. Hey, a voice cried, and the three turned to see a group of adults glaring down at them. Sheesh, can't believe you've all been ignoring us for so long. We are insects. Naoko spat dangerously. What? One of them asked. Were. Naoko gritted her teeth and charged forward, her skin turning to steel, and Izuku quickly pulled his drumsticks out and started striking the drums. As green lightning enveloped Naoko's steel-covered skin, she moved faster and became a blur as she'd shot forth to take care of all the bad guys and moved back to pout at Izuku. Still mad at you, she stated, holding up the edges of her skirt as the bad guys started rolling down the hill. See, Tetsu laughed as he wrapped his arms around the two of them. Us two, backed by Midori bro's hype, make us unstoppable. Quickly he pushed them away. Let's go, more bad guys need smashing flat, he cheered and charged forward. Oi, get back here you minion! Naoko roared, pulling Izuku towards the hot-blooded and hard-headed teen. Brother guy, Tetsu cried with a laugh as he descended on the bad guys, his skin shimmering as it turned to steel. Quickly Naoko released Izuku, and as he began beating his drums again, she flipped over and the two steel-skinned teens gained his green lightning that coursed over their bodies. Empowered by Izuku's quirk, the two decimated the villains before they had the ability to cry for mercy. Ah, I missed all the fighting, Izuku said as he slid down the drop. Both Tetsu and Naoko dropped off easily. I'll save you some next time, Midori br. A steel kick from Naoko sent Tetsu down. She flipped her hair and then stated with a smile, I'll save some for you next time. Izu White'm still mad at you. She cried, stomping her feet and raising her arms. I'm sorry, Izuku said as Tetsu jumped back to his feet. Mono bro, it isn't very manly to kick over your bros out of nowhere. He cried. Hey, I see more villains, Izuku said, peering off the mountain. He saw a large group of adults all pooled together at the bottom. Maybe if we roll a big snowball it'll take them all out. Naoko smiled. Great idea, Izuku. She walked over to the edge and found the center of the bad guys. Minions, stand here, she said. For some reason Tetsu stood exactly where she wanted, right here. He asked. Naoko studied him for a moment. Perfect, now curl up slightly. And again for some reason Tetsu did as she asked, like T. Turn to steel, she said, pushing him over the edge with her foot. Whaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaa They watched as he turned into a giant snowball and neared the villains. Naoko, you're starting to act like your old self would, are you okay? She crossed her arms. Maybe if you hadn't betrayed my trust I wouldn't have had to. Betrayed? Why? Wait, what's that shiny thing? Izuku asked, peering down the cliff. She turned and watched as something shiny leapt out from behind the villains and stopped the Tetsu snowball from smashing through them. How'd he stop that stupid minion of mine? Naoko asked with a growl. She grabbed Izuku's arm. Come on, we'll go handle this strong villain personally. She led him down a path, slowly at first, but eventually Izuku pulled free of her arm and charged past her, trying to help Tetsu. She blushed seeing his determined face, but her expression hardened, and she gritted her teeth. After all I changed for him. He never even noticed me, and then he... ... She screamed internally. She couldn't even think those words. She broke into a sprint after him. She'd talk to him later. She was mad enough now. She'd cool off and then have a stern chat with him about ignoring the girl who loved him. When they reached the bottom they found Tetsu breathing heavily as he clashed with a. Is that a large cybernetic crab? Crab-san. Izuku gasped, as the crab, despite being smaller than the mighty Tetsu who was empowered by the brother guy spirit and channeled the unstoppable power of manliness, was being held off by the cybernetic crab's cyberclaw clamps, which it used to grab his fingers and flip him over its shoulder cannons. This crab is so cool. Izuku cheered. Indeed, Tetsu stated, rubbing his back. When I rolled down the hill in my steel form it blocked the attack easily with one claw. The villains around started snickering. That's our newest member, one said. You heroes gotta make your society better, he said. Yeah, a cute little crab gets a cool quirk like cyborg and you normal people just start running from it. Now it wants revenge on you all. Oi crab, oh one finish them, oh. Shut up, Tetsu stated. Striking a pose, he stared at the crab. I sense manliness from this guy, he said. Midori bro, mono bro, handle those chumps for me would ya? This man is mine, he stated. And no hype Izuku, I'll win or lose on my own merits. More for me, Naoko said, turning to face the other non-crustacean, cybernetic villains. She stretched her legs. Izuku, give me a beat. Izuku nodded and quickly sticks struck drums and he and Naoko moved towards the enemies. Izuku was faster. He drummed quickly with one hand while his other bended back in a way that made it look like he had no bones in his arm. He brought the stick down on a bad guy's leg quickly, leaving a red mark on her leg. She lurched forward with a scream. That hurt, you little pest. Her arm had thorns growing through her hand as she tried to give him a thorny slap. Izuku compressed his spine and dodged the slap easily. The villain trying to sneak up behind him on the other hand did not. Ah, my face, he screamed, as his arms clicked in panic, causing Izuku to notice his arms had cannons in them and pointed one at the thorny villainous torso. He blasted her off him and then reached for his face trying to soothe the pain. Izuku quickly belted out some beats before pulling the guy's arm off his face and hitting him. Ow. Ow, ow. The man cried, but Izuku wasn't knocking him out. However, his hand slipped down his stick and accidentally reminded himself of the neat new function they had now. As it zapped the man and blew him away, Izuku blinked and looked down at his sticks. He could feel buttons in the handles. He pressed both, turning them both on, seeing electricity coursing through the odd tips. Maybe I should thank this May person, he thought. He released the buttons and the electricity shut off. Ha, Izuku smiled, as he started the beat up again. Naoko had more success. She'd already stomped 5 villains with her kick-based style. They weren't impressive at all. Some guy who made fire got kicked in the nuts. And then a straight kick to his chin. Next was a guy who bragged he could make things slow on contact, so she kicked his wrist back so hard he backhanded some bug guy in the face, sending him into a very slow flip. Not that he got off easy. The second he was in her range she stood on one leg and gave him a barrage of kicks before launching him back into the slow guy, whose nose she poked after she walked by, then delivered a viscous kick to his face knocking a few teeth loose. Then a woman's arms and legs became tentacles and she had a disgusting perverse grin on her face. Naoko grabbed her arm, slowing her on contact. With Izuku here, Naoko didn't have to worry about her time running out to use either of her copied quirks. Thus she changed back to steel and became a blur as she messed the woman's face up before launching her into the sky, again copying her quirk before she did. Legs like tentacles could come in handy if she needed more raw power quick, and arms could if she needed to copy a quirk. And lastly was a guy who quickly charged at her and was axe kicked a few, 17 times because she was in a rotten mood and hated his face. Tetsu was engaged in a fierce battle with his crustacean foe. They traded punches with no regard for blocking. They were men, and the two manliest here. There was no reason right now to block. It was a battle of wills with the two just testing their opponent wouldn't break so easily before they actually started trying. The crab lost the battle though when it struck Tetsu hard in the chest. I win that battle, he gasped in pain before driving his fist into the crab's shell. The crab pushed his arm away and aimed a strike at Tetsu's neck, firing its claw at him. But the young manly teen moved his head down and opened his mouth, catching the claw with his jaw. He could see it. With its eye stalks the crab asked, "Wh what? How did you stop my attack?" "Shimple," Tetsu stated, "Ahm yidi fair thrd fyach." In its eye stalks the crab showed respect and admiration for its manly opponent. "I see," its eye stalks say, "but so am I, worthy opponent," and its free claw touched the held claw. As it did, Tetsu realized the claw in his mouth was attached to the crab by a chain. Tetsu just barely spat the claw out before it had volts of electricity coursing through the chain, but as it dropped it wrapped around his leg. And though he cried out in pain, the crab etched the screams of the man into its mind. The screams were dripping with manliness. As Tetsu fell back, the crab reeled its claw back into its crab arm. It stared at its fallen enemy before it gave him a salute. Then it turned around, and saw the others were defeated by Izuku and Noako. "Look, my dinner has figured out we've stomped down the goons," Noako said, turning her skin to steel. "Dinner?" Izuku asked, "But it's sentient, right?" "Don't know. Don't care," she stated before Izuku started the beat back up and the two charged forward. Both of the cyber crab's shoulder cannons took aim at both of the teens, and blasted a jet black liquid at the duo, covering them and making them slip slightly. "What is this?" Naoko asked. Izuku licked some of the liquid off his lips. "Squid ink," he stated. "Whaat?" Naoko roared, pulling at her once pure white fancy dress that was her hero costume. "Do you know how hard it is to get squid ink out of white clothes?" She screamed and charged at the crustacean, who met her charge and attempted to block her kick. But instead she slapped the crab's arm and it slowed to a crawl. Slowly its eye stalks widened as Naoko gigged maliciously. "Looks like dinner is about to understand." She leaned forward as her leg was cocked backwards. Slowly the crab tried to block, only to get tentacles stomped on its head. Naoko started laughing, as her leg swayed back and forth, rapidly increasing its power as it did. "I know you think this isn't over cause you haven't been kicked yet, but trust me, when I kick your soft underside you'll be done." She grinned. "I'll let you close your eyes so you won't see it coming though." And thus the crab, knowing it couldn't do much but accept defeat, but it shook its frame lightly. It wasn't scared of her kicks, and would watch with pride as it was defeated. It had fought bravely after all. "Fine then, watch your defeat," she said, rising her leg more, but then the crab's vision was blocked by a stained black happy coat with the kanji for festival embroidered on the back. "Izuku?" Naoko asked. "What are you doing?" "I hurt this crab before," Izuku stated. "I owe it the chance to retreat." He stared. "Izuku, it's a villain." "No, it left Tetsu alive," he argued. "See." He pointed past the crab he was protecting and she could see Tetsu groaning and getting back to his feet. "What happened to you, Naoko?" he asked. "Normally you're not this aggressive." "How could I not be?" she demanded. "You cheated on me." Izuku gave her an odd expression. "Cheated on?" Then his eyes went wide and he sprang forward, pushing her to the ground. "Look out!" he cried as Vlad Ogre came shooting past where she'd been. He skidded to a stop and coughed out blood. He looked around at the gathered group. Then his eyes fell on the green-haired drummer. He hacked up a lot of blood. Assist." he coughed out. Izuku jumped up and pounded his drums rapidly. In a few seconds Vlad King stood proudly. His wounds healed and his strength returned. "Good," he stated, testing his fist. "Now stay down," he stated as a large black-skinned beak-faced villain leapt at him with a scream. Khan conjured a large blood fist over his own and cocked his fist back. As he got into range, the mighty Vlad King used his newfound power to uppercut the villain high into the air. He crouched down as his large blood fist turned into a massive blood hammer. Khan launched himself into the air and took the hammer with both hands. "Don't mess with US heroes," he roared, sending the villain across the entire USJ and into the wall on the other side. When he landed, he picked up his students. "Come, we need to help the others," he stated, and they dashed off. Meanwhile, with Kendo, Ibara, Komori, and Shihai in the city. "This means Spore," Komori shouted as the mushrooms she'd spread around grew, instantly bouncing villains around where they were ambushed by Shihai, who dashed around, pouncing from dark place to dark place, using the airborne villains as punching bags and platforms to stand on. Kendo worked the other side alone, but being a martial artist she showed much more efficiency with her group. Her Quirk big hands seemed harmless, even silly outside of a fight, but the way she moved Itsuka didn't show any silliness as she thrashed the group who tried carve past her. One was a large one-eyed villain with blue skin and large horns who charged towards her. She thrusted a gigantic palm at him which shoved him back. Before her other palm grew and smashed him down into the floor. She repeated the move 3 times until he stopped moving, whether because he wasn't able to being so far down in the ground, or because he was unconscious or worse wasn't for Kendo to worry about. Then quickly she set herself on the others. One tossed a boulder at her, but she quickly caught it and tossed it back. He wasn't so graceful and it dropped him to the floor. Another tried to grab her. Kendo entered their range and swept their legs, before hitting them with a spinning elbow. They just keep coming, Shihai said breathlessly. We've gotta stand our ground, Kendo ordered. The villains chuckled and slowly started to close in on the group. The teens started backing into each other. Any ideas, Komori? Kendo asked. None. I'm afraid I've used up quite a lot of spores and puns. I figured that when you used, this means spore 3 times, Komori, Shihai stated. Don't be so rough on her, Shadow Guy, one of the villains stated. He had dog-like features. Let her say whatever she wants before he stopped. His ears twitched. Why do I hear taiko drums? He asked, his ears perking as he looked around. And why are they getting closer? As soon as the words left his lips, the teens started smiling. As soon as they heard the drums, green lightning spread across their bodies. Don't you know? Kendo asked, drawing the villain's attention to herself. The sight of her and her friends coursing with green lightning confused them. Not all of our quirks only affect ourselves. This is the power of the Hypeman. Abara shouted. Her now lightning-quick vine hair darted around. The villains tried dodging, but those who were hit by it were sent flying. The few that managed to dodge were caught by Shihai or Kendo, who darted into the air as if they had rockets attached to them. This power is insane. Shihai laughed as he landed from a jump as high as if he were on the moon, watching the villains he and Kendo's strikes had sent flying. Wish we'd had it earlier, Itsuka said. Suddenly Vlad King skidded to a stop from a blur. Everyone all right? He asked, everyone jumping off his back. Thanks to the absurd range of hype, yes, Itsuka said. Khan nodded. Good, wish I could help more, but you need to try to get Izuku up there, Khan said, pointing up to a room high. It has a PA system, he said, turning around. Hold up, sensei, Tetsu said, bowing his head low. Please let me fight with you. Nyet, Vlad King said, shaking his head, would get hurt. Not if Izuku's hype is heard going through the entire USJ, Itsuka stated, which Noako and Abara alone can get him to. You two work security then, stop bad guys from getting to him, Khan stated. And when they figure out Midori bro is the one making you stronger? Tetsu asked, you won't be able to hold them off alone. His words made their teacher pause. He sighed. Fine, but just you two, he said. Now get up there and try to rescue the others. Both Itsuka and Tetsu climbed onto their teacher's back and then he took off. Alright, so we just need to get up there. Izuku started confidently, only to see the glare Naoko gave Abara, who resumed staring at her feet. Is something wrong? Shihai asked. She made him cheat on me, Monoma growled. Izuku, care to explain? Komori asked. Izuku shrugged. Apparently I've cheated on Naoko, and that's all I've got. Komori and Shihai shared a look. Any idea how you've cheated? Like, have you done anything with Abara that you don't normally do? Komori added. Izuku put a hand on his chin. After a few seconds his face turned red, steam shot out of his ears and his body went limp. So there is something, Shihai noted. Komori looked at Naoko. Care to fill us in? Her cheeks turned red, and her teeth were bared as Naoko spat out. They had. What? Shihai asked while Komori's jaw dropped. Abara looked aghast, but just turned away. Naoko walked over to Abara. You knew I liked him, and yet you too. In his bed, she gripped her hair, and did that. We didn't mean to hurt me so much. Naoko asked. Well, you did. Then Izuku sprang up. She asked to sleep next to me, he stated. Could that be it? What? Naoko, Shihai, and Komori asked. She woke up in the middle of the night scared, cause of her nightmares, and asked if she could sleep in my bed to help with her nightmares. Both Komori and Shihai turned to Naoko, who turned to Abara. You said you slept with him, she stated. Isn't that what I did? She asked. Talk later, Komori said. We need Izuku up by that PA. Yesterday. Naoko and Abara nodded. Now that the air had been cleared, they worked together to make platforms that they could use to get to the observation station. Powered by Izuku's hype, it took them minutes to get to the observation room. At which point Izuku busted open the room and switched on the mics. Testing. Testing. 1 2. Shihai gave him a thumbs up from outside the room, so Izuku smiled. This number goes out to my 1B classmates. It's called, Don't Let the Villains Win. He took a few steps back and quickly drummed a fast beat. Yui barely managed to still stand after she'd been thrown to the ground by the villains. She watched from the corner of her eye as Jirota was forced down by a villain with a staple quirk. It must have been hard for the bestial team to even breath with that giant staple at his neck. Then next was his left arm, then his waist and both his legs before returning to staple down his right arm. Next to hit the ground was a bag of Setsuna's parts. Each tried flying off in different directions as the girl, now consisting of only her head, left arm and left leg, glared at the guy who stepped on the bag to keep it from flying off. Yui frowned. As she was approached next, she had nothing left in her arsenal. She closed her eyes. It was over. Shiota barely regained consciousness. He tried to stop a villain from hurting Pony, but his own quirk had been blasted back into his face. As he looked around, he could tell he was wielded to Pony's back. His teammates had been surrounded while he was out. Reiko with some stones, Pony with her horns, Yosetsu with his rivet gun, and Kosei trying to shield them with his solid air quirk. But Shiota knew they weren't going to last much longer. The villains were drawing closer and closer, and his friends were getting tired. He tried to move, to help in any way he could, but his body wasn't listening. His arms hung limp at his sides, only moving when Pony moved too quickly. He gritted his teeth. They were outmatched from the start. Hiro Ren stood proudly as the villains descended upon them. Gentlemen, he stated seriously, it's been an honor and a privilege making my last stand with you all, he stated, his scales twitching. Sen looked around in a panic. He started, we're not gonna, are we? Togaru gritted his teeth. Seems so. Shit, he stated, crossing his arms. At least we're gonna take down as many of them as we can, he said, conjuring blades from out his forearms. Their only hopes for escape were Juzo and Kyojuro, both of whom had already been captured. Sen frowned but slapped his cheek with his only still working arm. Right, I'm sorry, I was. Nothing to apologize for, Hiryu stated. The three took a stance, each prepared to at least go down swinging. 13 was forced to watch from where she was laying as the three students protected her. She was in far too much pain to stand or pass out, and thus would be forced to watch as they were. She tried forcing her arm up again. Maybe this time it'd work. This time she'd be able to help this time. The speakers cut on. A loud screech was heard as the PA cut on. Testing. Testing. 1 2, a peppy voice cut through the chaos, drawing all attention to where the speakers were. Can it be? Shiota thought. Sen dropped to his knees in relief. Oh, thank God. He laughed happily, joined by the chuckles of his teammates. For Yui, a smile broke over her normally stoic face, and she forced herself up. I'd advise you all start running, she stated happily. Before anyone could question the sudden relief and joy of the teenagers, the voice cut through the air again. This number goes out to my 1B classmates. It's called, Don't Let the Villains Win. Then suddenly upbeat drums were playing through the speakers. But with them, green lighting spread along the students and teachers of UA. Wounds that they'd had began closing up rapidly, and any fatigue they felt vanished. 13 began to stand, as the wounds she'd received from Kurogiri closed almost instantly, and quickly a new vitality spread through her. Whoa, she stated. The teens turned to her as she raised her hand. Students, one side please. You won't want to do that, miss, Togaru stated. Show her Sen, he said. Sen laughed. My pleasure. He raised his arm and it began spinning rapidly, much faster than Sen had ever managed to on his own. He thrusted it forward and like a bullet it tore through enemies far beyond his range. It's hype, ma'am, Hiryu stated. Izuku's quirk is working overtime, making us all much stronger than we were before. Even our quirks, she finished with a nod. Well then, let's go thank these people for the nice opportunity to train with them. Setsuna's parts made quick work of the bag as she came back together. Jirota tore through the staples keeping him down, and Yui grabbed a sturdy-looking rock. Let's see how you all enjoy being assaulted, Yui stated. They were laughing when we were hurt, Tokage said, cracking her knuckles. Let's see if they find it funny when we. Ladies, Jirota said apologetically. Call me old-fashioned, but I'd rather you two not dirty your hands with scum like this, he stated, taking off his glasses. He handed them to Setsuna. He let out a loud roar and dove at the criminals, his large strikes sending them flying as he dove into them. Such a gentleman, Setsuna said, giving Yui a look. Yui nodded at her. Charge! She cried as she and Setsuna, despite Jirota's wishes, joined the fray themselves. Shiota watched as his team, now empowered by hype, easily tore through the villains that were once giving them trouble. He was pulled off Pony's back and smiled as they congratulated themselves. Tamura Shigaraki watched in annoyance as suddenly, with the sudden sound of drums echoing throughout speakers, his failure villains were suddenly being blown away. What is going on? He asked. Kurogiri, get over. Tamura watched in horror as a large figure started charging through the mass of villains still around him. Tamura frowned. All Might, he hissed, before suddenly the figure stopped. The figure was in fact not All Might, but Vlad King, Tetsu, and Itsuka Kendo, all covered in green lightning. The two teens quickly dove off their teacher, who conjured a naginata out of his own blood and began spinning it above his head. As villains dove towards him, his arms flashed. Suddenly twin blades of air cut through both sides of the villains in front of Blood Ogre, who gritted his teeth like a demon and shouted in his native tongue of Russian, phrases which teen and adult alike couldn't understand, but his presence, voice, and frame made certain that they were intimidated anyway. All eyes were on him, so much that the villains barely even noticed the two teens also taking down villains, yet not a glance was passed their way, as their teacher's shouts kept drawing attention away from them. And then the naginata was gone, changed into a large boomerang which was thrown into the crowd. Next was a battle axe. After 2 swings it was tossed like a spear. Then a large spiked ball on a chain he was swinging around so fast he was almost creating whirlwinds. Altogether he looked like a demon. As the villains before him fell, Khan pulled the ball and chain back and after 3 spins tossed it toward Tamura, who recoiled in horror before a black portal opened up before him and the ball and chain fell through. Khan watched as it fell, though another into the water. He turned back to glare at Tamura and Kurogiri, who stared back at him. You are responsible for all this? He asked. Why? And that was as far as Tamura got before Vlad King shot forward like a bullet and kicked him in the throat. Kurogiri was forced to open a warp gate to block Ogre's hammer. Another gate opened up behind Khan and then his hammer dissolved before it could hit him. Think I don't know your tricks by now? Khan asked. You have no offensive ability by yourself, Kurogiri. He spat the name as if it were dirt. Yet you know nothing of mine, right? 13. Miss 13 is. Kurogiri was stopped when Tetsu and Itsuka both smashed into him. Not who you need to worry about, Vlad King said as he stormed forward, a large fist of blood surging forward to strike Kurogiri. As soon as it touched him it shot off, blasting Kurogiri back. Now, he cracked his knuckles and turned to Tamura, who was still writhing on the floor. Time to clean up this mess. No, Tamura said as he rolled over. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said. We supposed to win. He growled. You and your students were supposed to be weak. From my experience, Vlad King said, villains are always much weaker than heroes, he stated. Is not surprising. After all, you can't even fight fair, cause you know you'll lose. Then a portal opened above Khan and Itsuka, and Tetsu pull him away just in time for the bird-beaked villain to drop where he'd been standing. Nomu, Tamura hissed, get back up and kill them. He's not going. Tetsu stopped when the beaked villain got back to its feet and loomed over them. He stood up. Itsuka asked. Children, Khan stated, run. Itsuka and Tetsu frowned, but nodded and began running away. The Nomu stared right ahead blankly while Khan made another hammer. This time I won't hold back. It won't matter, Tamura stated gleefully. Nomu, kill him, he ordered. The villain, Nomu, raised its hand and then tried to smash Khan, but a shot from his hammer forced back its fist. Quickly he spun the hammer around, making a spike out of one end of the hammer out of one end and stabbing the villain in his brain. After Khan ripped the spike out, he brought the hammer up into Nomu's chin, knocking off its beak and sending it up. He spun the hammer around faster and faster, almost creating a whirlwind. When the Nomu came back down, it was greeted by a blood hammer to the throat that sent it sliding across the ground. Khan's hammer turned into a naginata and he swung wildly, sending slash after slash at the downed villain. When it rose again, he threw the naginata at it, which only bounced off its skin. "What?" Khan asked. Nomu turned to him and shot toward him with a scream. "Ya ak hua!" It wailed as swung a fist that would have struck him square in the chest. Unfortunately for it, Khan knew he couldn't take the hit, so he hit the ground. As it flew by him, he made twin bloodhooks attached to twin chains and rose quickly, stabbing them into the beast's shoulders. It continued falling forward until Khan stopped its flight. He dug his heels in and started swinging it around. After a few spins, he locked onto his targets and sent Nomu flying towards them. Tamura wailed as Nomu began flying back towards him, but Kurogiri opened a warp gate in front of Nomu and quickly it was smashed into the ground. It slowly rose as Vlad King shifted his weight from one leg to the other, trying to be ready for it to fly towards him again. It only took a few seconds for the lumbering villain to stand back up and start stomping towards the blood hero. After it raised its arm, Khan readied another uppercut, and as soon as it swung, he dodged around its swing, yet stepped closer to him. "Gotcha," Khan thought as his fist hit the creature's neck, launching it into a blood sickle. Vlad King took the sickle with both hands as he pulled Nomu down to the ground. Then he raised his other arm, making a sledgehammer which he used to hit the sickle deeper into the ground. The Nomu roared and wailed as the sickle was knocked deeper and deeper, until a portal opened up in the sledgehammer's path. Another opened up behind Khan's shoulder and he only realized too late. The force of the hammer knocked Khan to his knees, even though Hype was working to heal his wound at a fantastic rate, meaning he rose exactly when Nomu did. "The hell?" Tamura asked. He should have lost his arm after that. "How the hell is he both standing and completely fine?" he demanded. "It seems the green lightning is empowering him," Kurogiri stated. "Then who the hell has that quirk?" Tamura demanded. "And how the hell is it standing up to Master's Nomu?" Kurogiri looked around. His eyes narrowed as they saw the PA room. "Seems it's coming from the PA system." "Then bring whoever's in there here," Tamura ordered. Kurogiri nodded and opened a warp gate inside the room and dumping those inside it in front of him and Tamura. Both Izuku and Naoko fell out. Quickly Naoko grabbed Izuku and landed on her feet. "Thanks, Naoko," Izuku said. "You're welcome." She smiled. The two teens looked around. "Who are you?" she asked, looking at the two in front of her. Tamura scratched his neck, making sure to use only 3 fingers, though he was so annoyed he might have actually been scarring his own skin anyway. "Which of you two makes green lightning?" he demanded. Naoko and Izuku shared a look before they both shrugged. "Green lightning?" Izuku asked, shaking his head. "Never met anyone with that quirk." "Me neither," Naoko stated. "You sure you're not seeing things?" "I'm about to watch Vlad King die," Tamura said, pointing at the teacher. Naoko, who still held Izuku, turned. They watched as their teacher had gone from the offensive to defensive without Hype, and he was starting to slow as he dodged the Nomu. "Really?" Naoko asked. "I think not." She put Izuku down, making sure to brush her fingers against his hand. She got that usual chill down her spine as she copied Hype. Every single time it felt worse and worse, like she wasn't supposed to copy it, like the quirk itself didn't like her. Her heart started beating excruciatingly fast as she and Izuku slowly stepped away from each other and closer to their teacher. Her breathing hitched as her body started convulsing. Hype really was an unpleasant quirk. Izuku gave her a smile. She only wished it made copying his quirk worth it. She loved every part of the green-haired boy, every part of him except his quirk. She took a deep breath as Izuku twirled his drumsticks. Hype flared inside, causing her to choke again as she was forced to take another set of deep breaths. She could never decide if the feeling of invoking Hype was closer to electricity coursing through her veins or a heart attack. She gave Izuku another worried glance. "How do you do this? Every single day?" she asked herself. She composed herself again and just started singing as Izuku started to drum. Lightning covered their bodies, a mixture of green and yellow. Keeping pace with Izuku's drums should have been hard, but for Naoko the hardest part of Hype was simply using Hype itself. As the mixture of lightning washed over Vlad King, he caught the Nomu's fist, pushed it back and then blinked as blood covered his vision. He turned around. He'd only intended to step into his strike, but the double Hype had made that single step so fast it turned the Nomu into a puddle. But already he could see it reforming from a lone arm. He tried to get to where it had been but kept launching himself past it. Tamura seethed at the sight, virtually foaming at the mouth as Khan shot like a bullet from one side of the facility to the other. Kurogiri however watched as Khan again shot past the arm until he shot out of the range of hype. Tamura now. He said, a warp gate opening at Vlad King's waist and in front of Tamura. The second he felt the touch of Tamura, Sekijiro Khan was in pure agony. It was as if his body was being disintegrated slowly. He turned and saw the arm trying to grab it as he fell, but Kurogiri deactivated his quirk, leaving the pro hero to hit the floor. Next out of the warp gate was the severed arm of the Nomu, which slowly started to regenerate. Orders, Tamura? Kurogiri asked. Tamura glared at the two teens in front of him. We'll kill these two, and then we'll leave. Quickly Izuku started to look around. Gotta be something that can help us. He smiled. Help me out over here, he said, drawing Naoko's attention. Izuku had found a villain with a cannon on his back and was already untying it. Right, Naoko said as she ran over to help. It won't save you, Tamura stated as he started walking over to them. It didn't take the too long to tie the cannon to Izuku's back and stuff any ammo into his happy coat. Naoko began looking around herself and started kicking the unconscious villains in the head hard while Izuku looked for weapons. As Tamura got closer and closer, the teens started more to panic, with Naoko just starting to pull villains' teeth out. The teens rejoined together. Any good quirks? Izuku asked. No idea. I haven't added any to my arsenal because I was already using 4, she stated. Weapons? Izuku handed her a pile of weapons, a sword, staff, nunchucks, a sai, to which she dropped most but the staff. Better range, right? She asked. Though rather than fight Tamura, the two slowly started backing away. Neither of them could really hit him because of Kurogiri, thus they wanted to try and gain some space. But after a few more steps, a warp gate appeared behind them with Tamura stepping out of it. Going somewhere? He asked, trying to grab Naoko. Both teens quickly invoked hype through drum and song and used their enhanced power to move away from him, taking great care not to step into a warp gate. Naoko turned back. The Nomu was starting to grow its torso back now. We're running out of time, she stated. There's no escape, kids. You two are dead, Tamura stated as he started to close on them. Both Naoko and Izuku shared a nod and stopped in their tracks. Good victims, Tamura said as he raised his arms. Now die, he screeched as he tried to grab their throats. With a flash of green and yellow lightning, sound of song and drum, Tamura's head snapped back as a steel Naoko gave him a double handstand kick to the throat while Izuku pressed his shock sticks into Tamura's shoulder blades as hard as he could. Tamura screamed a muffled scream as he fell backwards, his arms unable to move. As soon as Kurogiri tried using a warp gate to catch him, Izuku bent his spine so his head, and the cannon tied to his back, was aimed towards him. A shot rang out as the cannonball sailed towards the shadow villain, exploding a bit away from him, with him closing the warp gate so the blast wouldn't hurt Tamura. The explosion sent him into a rock where he glared at them but seemed unable to move. Naoko looked from the two villains. Yeah, she cheered, we did it. Izuku smiled at her, then his expression fell as a large shadow fell over him. Naoko turned. The mostly regenerated Nomu glared down at them. It was missing an arm and standing on one of its bones rather than a foot, missing part of its face and its beak, yet it still loomed over the two. Both the teens looked as Tamura glared up. No, kill them, he hissed quickly before Naoko kicked him again, shutting him up. The large creature let out an earth-shaking scream as it raised an arm, drawing the attention of the remaining 1B class. It took each a while to take in the sight before them. In a sea of defeated villains, 3 stood. A villain with hands covering his body laying on the floor, Kurogiri against a rock, and a large beak-faced villain missing parts of its body who kept screaming as it loomed over their classmates. Far away was their crawling teacher. As 13 saw him, she held in a gasp. The only good thing was that he was still together. Quickly the villain tried to smash the teens, but Izuku leapt back, pulling Naoko with him. He tried to reassure her as the shadow fell over him again. Behind Izuku, Naoko fell to her knees, her wide tear-filled eyes squarely on Izuku in the shadow of the giant villain. Izuku smiled and struck a pose. He took a deep breath. I'm gonna be the #1 hero, he roared. Kurogiri laughed from where he was. No, my boy, you're going to be a stain. As Nomu raised its arm, Izuku hit the drums on his body. Green lightning coursed through him. Then he compressed his spine and put his head between his legs. Just before Nomu struck him, he rolled past Nomu's legs and skidded to a stop on his feet near his teacher. Missed me, he chanted as he played his drums. With another screech, the beast dashed towards Izuku. It was a hopeless battle. Izuku dodged and ducked past the villain that he had no hope of beating, yet he never gave up hope. He kept looking around for some way to win, or at least survive, as he dodged the massive hands of the beast. But as the Nomu approached him again, Izuku twisted his body out of the way of the attack and lit the fuse with the electricity in his drumsticks, and an explosive ball hit it square in the head. Izuku twisted by it and jabbed his shock sticks into the ribs of the villain. It made no reaction to the shock and just tried to reach for him again, but Izuku rolled back, firing another shot into its face as he regained his footing. As Kurogiri watched the battle transpire on, which had the teenager dodging past his superweapon, playing his instruments to try boosting himself, and attempting to fight back pathetically, it eventually bored him. It's time to end this, he thought as he opened a warp gate over Naoko, and put her in front of the Nomu. Izuku looked shocked, but struck his drums and rolled backwards. Naoko barely saw the shadow over her before Izuku kicked her away. Her eyes went wide as she saw that figure closing in on her crush, yet he smiled warmly at her, and her heart sank as he said, "Sorry I died." Her mouth opened, her arm raised, no, but she couldn't hear herself as the large beast's fist reached Izuku. As it did, green lightning flashed over Izuku's body, and suddenly it was like his 14th birthday never happened. His happy coat tore open as his body became intensely muscular. The Nomu still smashed his head into the floor and his body deflated as blood shot out. The gathered teens watched in horror as a member of their class had his head hit the stone ground below him. Jaws dropped, people whimpered, eyes widened, they just watched someone die in front of them. But among the reactions was a shout, a cry, and with it the world started moving again, as the teens desperately started down the hill, each of them rushing towards the massive villain in the hopes of helping their friend. Some diverted to grab their teacher. After all, when Izuku was rescued, he could heal his wounds. When the teens met Nomu, each tried to shove him away from their friend. Tetsu tried shoulder charging him, but just bounced off of him. Abara wrapped her hair around the creature and tried pulling him off, but she couldn't even lift him. Itsuka and Jiroda hit him together but had as much success as Tetsu had before them. Kosei put an air bubble around the villain's head, trying to deprive it of air. Reiko raised her arm, throwing the unconscious villains at it, while Hirayu fired upon it with his scales. Juzo moved through the floor, making it slicker, so Nomu started tilting back and Kyojuro grabbed Izuku's arms. Tetsu, Itsuka, Jiroda, Sen, all rounded on the front as they charged at the same time, shoving the villain back, with Kyojuro pulling Izuku away. "Thanks," Izuku said with a smile. Kyojuro cried, "You're alive." Izuku nodded. "Yeah, when Naoko cried, her hype spread throughout me, saving me. Also I returned to my muscular form just before it hit me." "Muscular form?" Kyojuro asked. "Ask Naoko." Izuku stated, hopping off the teen's shoulders. "Right now it's time to bring the hype," he declared. And as quickly as Pony brought Vlad King in range, Izuku belt out a quick beat, spreading hype across the gathered teens. As soon as the drums sounded out, and the green lightning returned, people turned to see the still standing, yet bloodied up Izuku, who smiled back. Quickly Vlad King was back on his feet. "All right," he roared, "follow me," he said as he charged forward. Each of his students except Izuku and Naoko followed after him as he charged towards the Nomu. He punched it in the gut before running by it. The action mimicked by Pony behind him, Kyojuro behind her, Sen behind him, Setsuna behind him, Shioda behind her, and so on. As the chain of gut punches continued, Khan shot forward again, this time hitting it in the throat, and again the action continued, and he and the students charged forth, striking it in the stomach, the knees, anywhere they could, over and over in a seemingly unending chain of strikes. The last person in the chain hadn't even performed the first strike yet, but there were 40 more strikes, and it grew by the second. Eventually, as that strike counter neared the hundreds, Vlad King roared, "Surround him and prepare to knock him up." The students followed the instructions, making sure those that would launch it higher were much closer to it. And then they launched it skyward. Kurogiri, having regained some control of his body, prepared to drop it back into the field. before the Nomu and most of the upper part of the USJ vanished into a black hole that swirled with green lightning. He turned his head to see 13 looking terrified at her own hand while the students cheered. Quickly he made a portal swallow up Tamura, and then himself after he was sure he was safe. The USJ was alive with cheers as the teens and teachers had managed to stomp back the villains. High fives, chest bumps, hugs were all thrown wildly, until just as fast as they started, they stopped as the teens realized what they'd just been through, and quickly, despite not being exhausted, they all fell to the floor. Except for one of them. Izuku Midoriya was breathing heavily, but he was just glad to be alive. He looked around at all the defeated villains until someone pulled him into her sobbing embrace. To others the words Naoko said were unintelligible, just her breaking past her usual superior attitude as she realized she almost died, but Izuku understood her. "You did it again." She sobbed into his coat. "You nearly died again," she stated, hitting him softly. "Don't lie, I saw it." "It's okay Naoko," he said, "I just made it, didn't I?" "Shut up," she demanded, and she held him tighter to her chest. Suddenly she raised her phone up. When the screen flashed on, Izuku's usual smile fell. On the screen was a photo of the two of them and Katsuki Bakugo, before Izuku's 14th birthday. It was taken after Izuku and Bakugo had sparred, at what had been an easy victory for Izuku. Because at the time Izuku had been almost as muscular as Vlad King. "You can't take things like that anymore, you know that," Naoko stated. Izuku nodded, as the phone turned off, reflecting his now lack of muscles of any kind. Before he'd been practically a gym rat without actually going to the gym. Then his 14th birthday happened and all of his musculature just vanished. There was no explanation for why it happened, but Naoko had one. "Hype did this to you," she whispered as she held him. "It stole your ability to fight because it's an evil quirk." "But," he stated, "Hype's the only reason I can still stand." "Because it won't let you sleep," she stated, settling into him more. "Hype's my quirk," Izuku stated, "it's all I've got." "Because it stole everything else from you," Naoko said, "everything but me." "Thanks for sticking by me Naoko," Izuku said. "If you really want to thank me," she started, "be my boyfriend." Izuku's head fell back as steam rose out of his ears. Naoko smiled. "I'll get your answer later." She pulled Izuku into her arms and set them both down on the floor. She made certain not to touch his skin so Hype could leave her, and as soon as it had the strain it forced on her made her pass out as she held the boy she loved. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.